Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. The basilisk was moving toward Chris and Harry. She could hear its heavy body slithering heavily across the dusty floor. Eyes still tightly shut, Chris began to run and started to search something in her bag. "Gotcha," she whispered as she took out the dagger. Step 1. Blind the basilisk, she repeated in her mind, then concentrate. Imagining basilisk's eyes were not easy, but she concentrated and remembered the description Myrtle had gave about its eyes. Suddenly she heard something hitting the ground beside her, and a voice, "Ow." Chris realized Harry had fell. There was no time. If she doesn't shoot now, then Harry was dead. She threw the dagger holding the chain attached to its hilt. There was a loud, explosive spitting sound right above her. As she felt a pull on the chain, she pulled it back. In no time the dagger came back in her hand. She concentrated again, and threw the dagger. She heard Riddle was saying something furiously in parcel tongue. Chris didn't need to know what he was saying. She opened her eyes and looked back at the basilisk. The enormous serpent, bright poisonous green, thick as an oak trunk, had raised itself high in the air, and its great blunt head was weaving drunkenly between the pillars. Chris looked straight into its face and saw that both its great bulbous yellow eyes had been punctured. Blood was streaming to the floor and the snake was spitting in agony. "It worked," Harry said, getting up from the floor. Chris threw his wand towards him. Harry caught it. Riddle hissed again, looking very angry. Harry said with a trembling voice, "It can still smell us, hear us. It can still kill us." "I know, that's why I've a thing," Chris said, and pulled out the big box she had collected from Hagrid's hut. She waved her wand on it and opened it. Suddenly sharp crowing sounds came from the box. Few roosters came out of the box. The blinded serpent swayed, confused, madly. It wanted to leave the place, but Riddle was hissing something loudly, and the basilisk was getting more mad. The snake's tail whipped across the floor and hit Chris and Harry hard. Chris's head smashed on the nearest pillar. Harry was swept away a little farther. Chris felt a sharp pain in her head. Blood was dripping from her face. She was feeling dizzy. She was caught off guard, but the thing more angered her, which was she had lost her wand and bag because of dizziness. She couldn't see clearly where her wand and her bag was or where the box went with the rooster. There was a crowing sound, but not too loud. She didn't know why, but a voice was screaming these inside her head. The snake was coming near her, its mouth stretching wide, but then the basilisk stopped and backed away. Chris was surprised as looked at the basilisk. Then Riddle hissed again furiously. Chris felt the basilisk was fighting over Riddle's commands, but it failed. Again Riddle was controlling it. Chris felt a heavy object in her hands. She looked at her hands and saw the sword. The Gryffindor sword had appeared in her hands, out of nowhere. As the snake tried to come close to her, without thinking she held the sword up and stabbed it on its neck. She pulled it out and stabbed again. The snake was in pain. She felt bad and pulled out the sword. The basilisk keeled over sideways and fell, twitching to the floor. Chris felt the pain on head again. It was coming back. She was feeling dizzy again. She walked towards Ginny, who was still unconscious. Harry also came near them. Riddle laughed in a cold way. "As I said before, Christina, you're different, brave, intelligent, loyal, determined. Precious qualities. You killed the basilisk, but now think, how will you kill me? I'm a memory persevered in a diary, and in few minutes, Ginny will be dead, and I'll be alive and powerful. So you see, after doing so much you still lost at last. How sad." He laughed again. Chris thought for a moment, then looked around and saw on the floor, near the statue's giant toes, lying open there, was the little black diary. She crossed Ginny and went towards the diary, clumsily. Her vision was not clear. The pain in head was increasing. Riddle and Harry watched her as she kneeled in front of the diary and suddenly stabbed it with the sword. Riddle and Harry both didn't see that coming. There was a long, dreadful, piercing scream. Ink spurted out of the diary in torrents, streaming over, flooding the floor. Riddle was writhing and twisting, screaming and flailing, and then he had gone. Then and there was silence. Silence except for the steady drip of ink still oozing from the diary. Then came a faint moan from Ginny. She was stirring as she sat up. Chris sighed and collapsed on the floor. Her vision went black. Chris woke up in a familiar room, the hospital wing. Her father was sitting beside the bed, and on the other side of the table there was few flowers, candy and cards. Dad? She spoke softly. Her father, Mr. Norton, was almost asleep. He opened his eyes, looking startled. He looked at Chris with moist eyes. He hugged her hurriedly. Chris smiled. I'm fine, Dad. Fine? Do you call it fine? You're in this bed for a week, said Mr. Norton, with cracked voice. 5.5 days, Mr. Norton. Madame Pomfrey came and gave Chris a potion to drink. 5.5? Really that much? Chris said, looking surprised. You got a nasty hit on your skull? I fixed it, but you needed lots of rest, so I gave you a sleeping potion. You can leave tomorrow, Madame Pomfrey said with a smile. Tomorrow? But I feel fine, Madame Pomfrey. Chris protested. Who knows better in this matter? Madame Pomfrey said with a strict tone. You, said Chris quietly. Madame Pomfrey nodded and left. How are you feeling? Mr. Norton asked. Fine. Wait. What happened after I was unconscious? She said. Chris thought about that day, but there was not any memory after Ginny woke up. Yes. About that, did you kill a giant snake? Mr. Norton almost screamed the last part. Relax, Dad. It wasn't that big. It was like a normal snake, like very small 4 or 5 foot. She lied. But Mr. Weasley said, Mr. Weasley? Yeah, so how is their daughter, Ginny? Chris asked, trying to change the topic. Oh. She is fine. She left the hospital wing on that same day, but I heard Madame Pomfrey speaking that her mental health will take time to get back to normal. She needs lots of love and care. Chris nodded and picked a card from the table. The first colorful card was from Luna. She wrote a get well soon message with different colors. Chris smiled and took the next one. It was from Hagrid, and the last one was from Ginny, a thank you card. Who brought these flowers, Dad? A boy. I think his name was Harry. Oh, Chris smiled, looking at the flowers as the events of that day came back to her. Dad, do you know where is my wand? And my bag? Yes, Ginny told me. She took those to your room, Mr. Norton replied. Next morning, Chris left the hospital wing. Her father left Hogwarts. Chris walked towards the Gryffindor Tower and noticed everyone was staring at her. But this time the stares was different. They were smiling at her and there was amazement in their eyes. Chris didn't know she should be happy or not. She never wanted to be popular, and after watching Harry's condition, she seriously didn't want to compete with Lockhart. As she entered the Gryffindor common room, there was a loud applause and cheering which greeted her. Fred and George did a firework with her name. Percy wasn't happy, but he didn't stop them. In fact, he smiled and thanked Chris for saving Ginny. Harry hugged her. Now tell me, how did you manage to pull 2 girls over the pipe? Chris asked Harry as she pulled Harry and Ron aside. Oh, I didn't. Harry grinned. It was Fawkes, Dumbledore's bird. He pulled 3 of us out of the chamber. He came on its own. I was very happy to see him. Well, Myrtle wasn't very happy when she saw all of you alive, Ron said. 3 of them chuckled. And what's going on with those petrified people? Chris asked. Professor McGonagall said they will be back in a few days. The mandrakes are almost ready, Harry answered. And do you know you and Harry got 200 house points each, from Dumbledore? Ron said excitedly. Where? Really? Chris said, looking surprised. Yes, we will win the House Cup for sure. Harry grinned. Oh, and about Lockhart, you won't believe what happened to him. What? Other professors asked him to save Ginny, but he was running away. When your friend Luna caught him in the corridors and asked him about his heroics, about how could he leave Ginny to die. When he confessed that he didn't do any one of them, he just erased the actual hero's memory and took the credit. What the? Where is he now? I'll definitely like to punch that idiot. Very far from here. After saying those things, he tried to erase Luna's memory too. But he didn't know Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, Fred, George, Percy, and few other teachers were just around the corner and heard him clearly. They stopped him and threatened to hand over him to the ministry. He was very scared, and now he is out of Hogwarts. Harry finished with big grin. Shame, said Ron. He was starting to grow on me. They laughed aloud. Suddenly someone poked Chris from behind. Chris turned and saw it was Ginny. Chris became serious. I wanted to talk to you, Ginny said quietly. Chris just nodded and went towards their room. In room, Danielle and Lauren greeted Chris excitedly. I and Ginny have something to talk about. We need the room for some time, Chris said sharply. After looking at each other for a moment, both girls left. Ginny became nervous. Speak, Chris said. Well, thanks for saving me. Harry told me how you stood up to Riddle for me, how you killed the basilisk and Riddle. Also, I know that morning you sent a letter to Professor Dumbledore about me, explaining that it wasn't my fault so I should not get expelled. Dumbledore told me. Get to the point, Ginny, Chris said impatiently. Ginny sighed. I'm sorry, very, very sorry. I should have trusted you, not the diary. I'm so stupid. I'll never trust an object. Ginny started to cry. Well, you were stupid, but I guess not anymore. Chris finally looked at Ginny. Next time if you feel upset over my any kind of behavior, or you feel like I'm coming between you and Harry, just say it on my face. No, please, I had enough of Harry, Ginny said and stopped crying. Already? Yes. I realized I liked Harry just because he is a celebrity, and my brother's friend. I have learned my lesson. I'm never going to sacrifice my friendship over a silly attraction. Who said we're friends now? But I thought, oh, it's fine. I know. I don't deserve. Relax. Step 1 of being confident. Love yourself. Never see yourself as a small person. Chris said seriously, you're a great person, Ginny, and you deserve much more than you know. Ginny smiled with her watery eyes and hugged Chris. Chris hugged her back. Though, are you sure about Harry? You don't want me to stay away from him, or something? Chris asked, and Ginny shook her head. Okay, fine. And Ginny, if you have problems about thinking yourself as a great person, then just remember Draco Malfoy. I mean, that boy thinks very highly of himself, Chris said, and both giggled. After that, Chris checked her things, which Ginny brought from the chamber. Ginny told her Dumbledore have the sword and the diary. Chris took her wand and looked inside the bag. There was just the dagger and something small. Chris pulled the small thing out. It was a golden key, and at the end of the key a small snake was curved on it. Ginny, did you put this in my bag? Chris asked. No, I didn't. Then, what's this? The key of that chamber or something. Chris sighed and left it with her other things. I have to talk to Dumbledore. Few days later, the day every petrified people came to life. Dumbledore called for a huge celebration and feast. Chris felt it was the best celebration in that year. Everybody was in their pajamas, and the celebration lasted all night. Colin and Hermione joined the feast. Colin hugged Chris and Luna. Chris gave Colin a new camera, the Christmas gift, as his old one was almost destroyed because of the basilisk. Hermione hugged Harry, Ron, and Chris, and specially shouted at Chris's ear, You solved it. You solved it. Ginny apologized to them. Many people came and apologized to Harry and Chris. Hagrid was there too. He came from Azkaban the same day. They saved Ginny. Chris thanked Hagrid for his help. Chris and Ginny went to see Mrs. Norris. Ginny apologized to Mr. Filch and almost everyone in the Great Hall. Gryffindors won the House Cup, as expected. Professor McGonagall announced the exams had been cancelled as a school treat. Harry told Chris that it was Draco's father, Lucius Malfoy, who gave Ginny the diary, but Harry freed Dobby, the house elf, from their slavery. 2 days later, Chris went to meet Professor Dumbledore in his office. I'm glad you came, Christina. I didn't have a chance to congratulate you for your victory. Harry told me everything. Well, I know it's very difficult to choose between what is right and what is easy. Thanks, Professor. But I wanted to tell you something. Yes? Chris gave the key to Dumbledore. I found this in my bag. It wasn't there before we went to the chamber, Chris said. Dumbledore examined the key over his half-moon glasses, smiled and looked at Chris. It's a precious key. I expect you to protect it dearly and do not tell everyone about this. Well, of course, except your close friends. So I can keep it? I mean, it felt school property. It is, but you've earned it, so you can keep it, Dumbledore said and gave back the key to Chris. Anything else? Chris shook her head. She took a step to leave, but then stopped and looked at Dumbledore. Professor, why do I feel that you're not telling me the entire truth? Chris said. Then I guess you can also feel that I've my reasons for that. Dumbledore said, smiling. Chris nodded. Don't worry, Christina. I'll tell you when it'll be the right time, and let me suggest you something. Always trust your feelings. The rest of the final term passed in a haze of blazing sunshine. Hogwarts was back to normal with only a few small differences. Defense against the dark arts classes were cancelled, and Lucius Malfoy had been sacked as a school governor. Draco was no longer strutting around the school as though he owned the place. On the contrary, he looked resentful and sulky. On the other hand, Ginny was perfectly happy again, and she was enjoying her most time with Chris, Colin, and Luna happily. Too soon, it was time for the journey home on the Hogwarts Express. Chris couldn't believe that it had been a year. She was living as a witch. Harry, Ron, Hermione, Fred, George, Ginny, and Chris got a compartment to themselves. Luna went to sit with some Ravenclaw students, who started to talking to her. Chris encouraged her so she can have few friends in her own house. Colin was clicking photos in the entire train. They made the most of the last few hours in which they were allowed to do magic before the holidays. They played Exploding Snap, set off the very last of Fred and George's filibuster fireworks, and practiced disarming each other by magic. Chris almost disarmed everyone pretty quickly. When they were almost near King's Cross, Ginny was telling a story to Chris, when unintentionally she slipped that her brother Percy has a girlfriend. Everyone was very shocked hearing this. Fred dropped a stack of books on George's head. "What? It's that Ravenclaw prefect, Penelope Clearwater," said Ginny, giggling. "That's who he was writing to all last summer. He's been meeting her all over the school in secret. I walked in on them kissing in an empty classroom one day. He was so upset when she was, attacked. You won't tease him, will you?" she added anxiously. "Wouldn't dream of it," said Fred, who was looking like his birthday had come early. "Definitely not," said George, sniggering. Chris laughed loudly, clearly understanding the twins' intentions. The Hogwarts Express slowed and finally stopped. Harry pulled out his quill and a bit of parchment and turned to Ron, Hermione, and Chris. "This is called a telephone number," he told Ron, scribbling it thrice, tearing the parchment in three, and handing it to them. "I told your dad how to use a telephone last summer. He'll know. Call me at the Dursleys, okay? I can't stand another 2 months with only Dudley to talk to." "I'll write you letters," Ginny said to Chris, grinning. "Sure. Liam will be glad to fly. I'll write too," Chris answered. "See you soon, guys," she said to looking at Ginny, Harry, Hermione, Ron, Fred, and George. They smiled. Then she left the King's Cross with her father. A girl with shoulder-length dark brown hair, oval face, and slim body was sleeping peacefully when her bedside alarm clock went off loudly. She yawned but wasn't in the mood to get up. After waking up early in the morning almost for 2 months, her body refused to ruin the day off. The reason behind her early mornings were her martial arts lessons, which she took over her summer break. Her father had asked her to take something easy after her first day lesson when she came back home with bruises on her entire body, but she was determined to learn. Anyone will think it's because she wants to defend herself. True, she really wants to defend herself, but there are other ways to do that. Especially when you are a witch, a real on. Yes, the girl lying on her bed right now is a real witch. She goes to a school, Hogwarts, which is for young witches and wizards. She finally got up from her bed when she heard a sound. Something had hit her window. She knew exactly what was it. She walked over to the window, opened it, and picked up a brown owl. "Hey, Errol." Terrell was the family owl of her friend, and a pure-blood witch, Ginny Weasley. Over the summer, Ginny had written many letters, and every time Errol had come to deliver it, unfortunately, every time he had hit the window, the girl took the letter from Errol's legs, then carried Errol to Leon, her own owl's cage. Errol opened one bleary eye, gave a feeble hoot of thanks, and began to gulp some water. The girl smiled and opened the letter. "Dear Chris, thanks for your birthday present. I liked the Muggle game set very much. Ron, Fred, George, and even Charlie were playing with me. As I mentioned before, we are in Egypt. We have enjoyed lots of things. It's very beautiful here in Egypt. Bill's taken us around all the tombs, and you wouldn't believe the curses those old Egyptian wizards put on them. Mom wouldn't let me go in the last one," Ron said. "There were all these mutant skeletons of muggles who'd broken in and grown extra heads and stuff. I didn't believe him. I'm so happy to be here I can't even begin to explain to you. Thanks to God that Dad won the money. We'll be back about a week before term starts, and we'll be going up to London to get our new books. Any chance of meeting you there? I mean, it's okay if you've already brought your books and stuff. Also, how is your training going? Is it finished or not? Tell me. Bye. Ginny. P.S. Harry left his uncle's home and living in Leaky Cauldron now. I heard Dad talking to Mom. Ginny's family, the Weasleys, were not very rich. In fact, they were very poor. But every member in that family has a great heart. In her last letter, Ginny had informed that her father had won a lottery in the Ministry of Magic, which was a piece of great news. And then there was Harry. Harry Potter, an orphan boy who happened to be best friends with Ginny's older brother Ron, lives with his uncle and aunt, and who always goes through some kind of trouble. Now he had left his uncle and aunt's house, God knows why, and was living in Leaky Cauldron, according to Ginny, which was the entrance of the magical market, Diagon Alley. After some time, Chris freshens up and left her room. Her father, Mr. Norton, was cooking in the kitchen. She entered the kitchen and sat near him. "Don't you had a meeting or something today?" Chris said while scanning the kitchen for food. "Yes, I had, and it ended 1 hour ago, so I came back," her father said, giving her breakfast. "Oh, all right," Chris started eating. "Don't eat much now. It's nearly time for lunch." Her father smiled. "Ugh, I overslept. I shouldn't have." I think you deserve it." "Hey, remember Harry? He left his uncle and aunt's house and living in Diagon Alley now." "Why?" "No idea. I didn't write to him after his birthday," Chris said, chewing the last bit of toast. "And what about Ginny? She is in Egypt. She is going to come back a week before we leave for school. Luna is also on a vacation with her father. I heard they were searching for some kind of new magical beast. Colin was in his home the last time he wrote to me. I asked you if you want to go somewhere. You declined," her father said, looking amused. "Yes, because you had important work meetings, Dad. Just because you're the boss doesn't mean you can leave those meetings for the sake of your daughter's holiday." "You know I can," Mr. Norton said, laughing. "But I don't think it's a good idea. By the way, I was thinking about trying for Quidditch this year. What do you think?" "I think you're asking for a broomstick. We will buy it." "No need to beg," Mr. Norton said, in a sing-song voice. "God," Chris groaned. "I'm not asking for a broom. I'm asking if it's okay with you, if I try for a flying game. You know what? Leave it. I know the answer, and please don't buy anything yet. If I got selected, then I'll send you a letter, and then, only then, you can buy a broom, and send it to me. Deal?" "Deal. So when are we going to Diagon Alley? You didn't buy any of your school supplies yet." "I know. Let's go next week." Next week, Chris went to Leaky Cauldron and asked about Harry. Surely he was living there for weeks, but at that time he was out, somewhere in Diagon Alley. Chris entered the Diagon Alley and first went to Flourish and Blots to buy her usual subject books. Charms, potions, transfiguration, herbology, defense against the dark arts, etc. Then she brought some potions ingredients and a few other needed things. After buying everything, she noticed a crowd in front of a shop named Quality Quidditch Supplies. Curious to know what the crowd in the shop was staring at, Chris edged her way inside and squeezed in amongst the excited witches and wizards, until she glimpsed a newly erected podium on which was mounted the most magnificent broom, the Firebolt. This state-of-the-art racing broom sports a streamlined, superfine handle of ash, treated with a diamond-hard polish and hand-numbered with its own registration number. Each individually selected birch twig in the broom tail has been honed to aerodynamic perfection, giving the Firebolt unsurpassable balance and pinpoint precision. The Firebolt has an acceleration of 0 to 150 miles an hour in 10 seconds, and incorporates an unbreakable braking charm, price on request. "We should buy it. It's so beautiful," said Mr. Norton overexcitedly. "Dad, no, not now. Please," Chris said with a sigh. "Chris?" A voice called her name from somewhere in the crowd. Chris looked around, and when two wizards moved from their place, Chris saw the owner of the voice. "Harry," she smiled. Harry gave her a big hug, grinning. "How are you?" he asked, as they left the crowd and stepped aside. "I'm good. How about you? Why did you leave your uncle and aunt's house?" Chris asked, raising her eyebrows. "How did you?" Harry began looking surprised.
"Ginny," Chris answered simply.
"Oh, yes. Well, I kind of blew my Uncle Vernon's sister, Aunt Marge, and left." "What?" Chris was shocked. "Wait, let me tell you the entire story. Uncle Vernon asked me to pretend that I'm a student at a criminal school, which I did in front of that Aunt Marge. But then she started to talk bad about my parents. I lost control and I didn't do it intentionally. Trust me," he sighed. "I thought the ministry is going to expel me, so I ran away from my uncle's house. But then surprisingly, Minister of Magic met me here, asked me to stay here, and also told me that I'm not expelled. I don't know why. I thought I'll be in prison for breaking the law." "Well, maybe because you're Harry Potter," Chris said innocently. Harry rolled his eyes and noticed Mr. Norton. "Oh, I forgot. I haven't officially introduced you to," she said, noticing Harry's gaze on her father. "Dad, this is Harry. Harry, my dad." "Nice to meet you, Mr. Norton," Harry said, shaking hands with him. Yes, I have heard a lot about you, but blowing up your aunt is not a good thing, young man." Mr. Norton said, smiling. Harry became red. Dad, relax, Harry. He is teasing you. And trust me, if she had insulted my dad, then I would have done worse than just blowing her up, Chris said, and Harry laughed. 2 days later, Chris got a letter from Ginny that they were going to Diagon Alley and will stay at Leaky Cauldron the night before they catch the train to Hogwarts. Mr. Norton looked very excited, and he convinced Chris to stay at Leaky Cauldron with the Weasleys. Chris didn't want to, but her father liked Mr. Weasley very much when last time they met at Hogwarts, when Chris was in the hospital wing. So his father couldn't wait to meet Mr. Weasley again. At last Chris agreed, packed her things and left for Leaky Cauldron. I hope you're well, Chris heard Percy said pompously, shaking hands with Harry when she entered. Very well, thanks, replied Harry weakly. Harry, said Fred, elbowing Percy out of the way and bowing deeply. Simply splendid to see you, old boy. Marvelous, said George, pushing Fred aside and seizing Harry's hand in turn. Absolutely spiffing. Percy scowled. Chris couldn't help but laughed. Fred noticed her and went towards her, then started to shake hands with her. Chris, it's so good to see you too, after a long time. George pushed Fred and seized her hand next. Of course. Absolutely splendid. I said that's enough, said Mrs. Weasley, depositing her shopping in an empty chair. Chris chuckled again. Ginny giggled and gave Chris a tight hug. I really missed you, Ginny said, smiling. I guess me too, Chris said, smiling back. She pointed at the twins, especially them. How are you, dear? Mrs. Weasley asked. I'm fine. Dad asked me to come here and stay for the night like you all. Chris pointed at her father, who was already talking to Mr. Weasley. I suppose you've heard our exciting news? Mrs. Weasley pointed at the brand new silver badge on Percy's chest. Second head boy in the family, she said, swelling with pride. And last, Fred muttered under his breath. I don't doubt that, said Mrs. Weasley, frowning suddenly. I noticed they haven't made you two prefects. What do we want to be prefects for? Said George, looking revolted at the very idea. It'd take all the fun out of life. Chris and Ginny giggled. Congratulations, Percy, Chris said after she stopped laughing. Percy smiled widely. Thank you, Chris. You want to set a better example to your sister, snapped Mrs. Weasley towards Fred and George. Ginny's got other brothers to set her an example. Mother, said Percy loftily. I'm going up to change for dinner. He disappeared, and George heaved a sigh. We tried to shut him in a pyramid, he told Harry, but Mum spotted us. I'm on your side in this. I'll take having fun over prefect or head girl badges any day. Chris whispered to Fred and George. They laughed. Before dinner, Mr. Norton left, because of some important meetings, and asked Mr. Weasley if he were able to take Chris with them. Of course, Mr. Weasley agreed. Dinner that night was a very enjoyable affair. Tom the innkeeper put 3 tables together in the parlor, and the 7 Weasleys, Harry, Hermione, and Chris ate their way through 5 delicious courses. How are we getting to King's Cross tomorrow, Dad? Asked Fred, as they tucked into a sumptuous chocolate pudding. The ministry's providing a couple of cars, said Mr. Weasley. Everyone looked up at him. Why? Said Percy curiously. It's because of you, said George seriously. And there'll be little flags on the bonnets, with HB on them, for humongous big head, said Fred. Everyone except Percy and Mrs. Weasley snorted into their pudding. Why are the ministry providing cars, Father? Percy asked again, in a dignified voice. Well, as we haven't got one anymore, said Mr. Weasley, and as I work there, they're doing me favor. Good job, too, said Mrs. Weasley briskly. Do you realize how much luggage you've all got between you? A nice sight you'd be on the Muggle Underground. You are all packed, aren't you? Ron hasn't put all his new things in his trunk yet, said Percy, in a long-suffering voice. He's dumped them on my bed. You'd better go and pack properly, Ron, because we won't have much time in the morning, Mrs. Weasley called down the table. Ron scowled at Percy. After dinner, everyone felt very full and sleepy. One by one, they made their way upstairs to their rooms to check their things for the next day. Chris was sharing a room with Ginny. They talked a lot before going to sleep. Next morning, Chris was going downstairs after getting ready when she heard Percy shouting at Ron. But I didn't do anything, Percy, said Ron with an irritated tone. Then how is Penelope's photo? Is like this, Ron? Percy said angrily. Chris remembered Penelope, Percy's girlfriend, who was attacked last year with Hermione. Chris chuckled and walked down. Mrs. Weasley and Hermione were talking about something. Chris joined them. After a few minutes, Ginny came down. What's up with Percy? Anyone knows why he is so grumpy this early morning? Ginny asked. I heard maybe, or maybe not. Ron did something to Percy's girlfriend's picture. Chris answered, suppressing a smile. Poor Ron, Hermione said. Ginny, Hermione, and Chris laughed. Mrs. Weasley also chuckled. I remembered my young days at Hogwarts, she said, with a nostalgic face.
I used to write letters to Dad, Ginny said, giggling.
Well, yeah, I used to also. I remember one time, someone told me that if I want people to fall in love with me, I should give them a love potion, and I brew lots of love potion for that. Mrs. Weasley said, smiling. Mrs. Weasley. Ginny and Hermione giggled again. So did you give it to someone? Chris asked, smiling. Yes. Only Arthur, but later I found out I didn't need to. Mrs. Weasley answered, and all of them laughed. Harry, Ron, Fred, and George came down. They all sat for breakfast. Chris noticed Harry was looking a little nervous and wasn't concentrating on anything. Later they were dragging their trunks in Leaky Cauldron's narrow staircase and piling them up near the door, with Leon, Hedwig, Harry's snowy owl, and Hermes, Percy's screech owl, perched on top in their cages. A small wickerwork basket stood beside the heap of trunks, spitting loudly. What's it, Hermione? Chris asked, looking at the basket. It's Crookshanks. I brought a new cat yesterday, she said to Chris, and turned towards the basket, which was still making noise. It's all right, Crookshanks. I'll let you out on the train. You won't, snapped Ron. What about poor Scabbers, eh? He pointed at his chest, where a large lump indicated that Scabbers, his rat, was curled up in his pocket. Chris always got a bad feeling about Ron's rat, Scabbers. Last year, Dumbledore advised her to trust her feelings, but what harm will a simple rat do? Chris didn't understand. Mr. Weasley, who had been outside waiting for the ministry cars, stuck his head inside. They're here, he said. Harry, come on. Mr. Weasley marched with Harry, and all of them followed. They walked across a short stretch of pavement towards the first of two old-fashioned dark green cars, each of which was driven by a furtive-looking wizard, wearing a suit of emerald velvet. Mr. Weasley took Harry, Hermione, Ron, and Percy to the first car. Mrs. Weasley and the others settled on the second one. Why is your father giving special treatment to Harry? Chris whispered to Ginny. I don't know. They are like this for weeks now, always worrying about Harry and thinking about him. Ginny whispered back. I also heard from Harry that even the minister is treating him differently. Ginny was about to say something when Mrs. Weasley snapped. Stop whispering. It looks bad. Ginny and Chris didn't say anything for the rest of the ride. They reached King's Cross with 20 minutes to spare. The ministry drivers found them trolleys, unloaded their trunks, touched their hats to Mr. Weasley, and drove away, somehow managing to jump to the head of an unmoving queue for the traffic lights. Mr. Weasley kept close to Harry's elbow all the way into the station. Right then, he said, glancing around them. Let's do this in pairs, as there are so many of us. I'll go through first with Harry. Chris and Ginny exchanged looks. As they dashed towards the wall between platform 9 and 3/4, Percy tried to go next, but Mrs. Weasley argued and ordered Chris and Ginny to go. Both girls walked fast and dashed towards the wall as well. Percy followed them behind. Next moment, they had fallen sideways through the solid metal onto platform 9 and 3/4, and looked up to see the Hogwarts Express, a scarlet steam engine, puffing smoke over a platform packed with witches and wizards, seeing their children onto the train. Percy suddenly appeared behind them. There's Penelope, said Percy, smoothing his hair and going pink again. Ginny and Chris caught Harry's eye, and then three of them turned away to hide their laughter, as Percy strode over to a girl with long, curly hair, walking with his chest thrown out so that she couldn't miss his shiny badge. Once the remaining Weasleys and Hermione had joined them, Harry and Mr. Weasley led the way to the end of the train, past packed compartments, to a carriage that looked quite empty. They loaded the trunks onto it, stowed Leon in the luggage rack, then went back outside to say goodbye to Mr. and Mrs. Weasley. Mrs. Weasley kissed all her children, then Hermione, Harry, and at last Chris. Chris was shocked by this gesture of Mrs. Weasley, but then she smiled when Mrs. Weasley gave her and Harry both an extra hug. Then she opened her enormous handbag and said, I've made you all sandwiches. Here you are, Ron. No, they're not corned beef. Ginny, Fred, where's Fred? Here you are, dear. Then Mrs. Weasley hurried everyone to get on the train and called Mr. Weasley, who was talking to Harry in a corner. There was a loud whistle. Guards were walking along the train, slamming all the doors shut. but Harry was still talking. At last, when steam was billowing from the train, it had started to move. Harry ran to the compartment door and Ron threw it open and stood back to let him on. They leant out of the window and waved at Mr. and Mrs. Weasley until the train turned a corner and blocked them from view. "I need to talk to you in private," Harry muttered to Ron and Hermione as the train picked up speed. Chris raised an eyebrow on him. Harry tried to say something, but Chris spoke first. "Let's go, Ginny." And she and Ginny walked away. After crossing almost every full compartment, Chris and Ginny found Colin and Luna. "Hello, Ginny." "Hello, Chris." "It's very good to see you," Luna said happily. "It's nice to see you to Luna," Chris replied, and sat down next to Colin. "How are you, Colin?" "I'm good. Do you know, I think my brother is a wizard too. This summer he showed many signs like me," Colin replied excitedly.
Really?
"That's great, Colin. You father must be very happy," Ginny said. "He is." Colin grinned. "How was your Egypt trip, Ginny?" "It was very nice," said Ginny. "What about you, Luna?" "Oh, it was nice to explore so many new magical plants and magical beasts," Luna said excitedly. "So anyone noticed that the prisoner Sirius Black was in Muggle news too?" Colin said suddenly. "He was in the Muggle news too?" Ginny asked. "Yeah, I saw that too. He killed 13 Muggles, 12 years ago, in bright daylight." Chris answered. "I heard in Diagon Alley that he was the right-hand man of Voldemort." Ginny flinched, hearing the name. "Sorry, Ginny," Chris quickly added, noticing her. "I don't understand how he left Azkaban, and more importantly, why now," Luna said seriously. "Maybe he found a chance only this time," Colin suggested. "Do you know who guard the Azkaban, Colin?" Chris said. "When last year I heard the name Azkaban many times, I did a little research on it. Azkaban is guarded by Dementor. They feed on human happiness and can extract souls with their Dementor's kiss. They don't have eyes, they feel human presence by their emotions. You can't fool them like that." Colin and Ginny shivered. "So you think that Black knew the trick before?" Luna asked. "Maybe, and I think now he is after something, that's why he escaped from Azkaban," Chris answered. "Don't know for sure, though."
Can we talk about something else?
Ginny said. "Like about Harry Potter?" Chris suggested, smirking. "Chris." Ginny scowled loudly. "What?" "I was teasing Colin," Chris said, and everyone started laughing. Mid-afternoon, just as it had started to rain, blurring the rolling hills outside the window, the plump witch, with the food trolley, arrived at the compartment door. Chris brought many things for all four of them. They ate those while talking and laughing. The rain thickened as the train sped yet further north. The windows were now a solid, shimmering gray, which gradually darkened until lanterns flickered into life all along the corridors and over the luggage racks. The train rattled, the rain hammered, the wind roared when the train started to slow down. "Are we already here?" Colin asked. "I think so. This train doesn't stop otherwise," Ginny said. The train was getting slower and slower. As the noise of the pistons fell away, the wind and rain sounded louder than ever against the windows. Chris got up to look into the corridor. All along the carriage, heads were sticking curiously out of their compartments. The train came to a stop with a jolt, and distant thuds and bangs told them that luggage had fallen out of the racks. Then, without warning, all the lamps went out and they were plunged into total darkness. Ginny stood up and grabbed Chris's hand. "Ginny, it's okay. Everything will be fine," Chris said, holding Ginny's hand. Though she assured Ginny, she felt something was definitely not fine. "Let me see what's going on." Chris tried to leave, but Ginny didn't let go of her hand. Chris sighed. "Fine, come with me. Let's find Fred, George, or Ron. Luna, Colin, we'll be back soon." "Okay," both said, and holding Ginny's hand, Chris left their compartment. As Chris and Ginny were crossing the dark corridors, they collided with someone. "Who's that? Who's that?" "Chris." "Hermione, what are you doing?" Ginny was looking for Ron. "Come in and sit down." In complete darkness, suddenly Ginny pushed Chris. Chris tripped over Hermione's leg and fell on someone. There was lots of ouch and ass sounds. Came because of this. Sorry, said Hermione. "Chris, is that you?" said the person under Chris. Yes, replied Chris, and tried to get up. "Quiet," said a hoarse voice suddenly. Chris could hear movements in the corner. None of them spoke. There was a soft, crackling noise, and a shivering light filled the compartment. Chris found herself over Harry, seeing Harry's red face. Chris hurriedly got up. The person who asked them to be quiet appeared to be holding a handful of flames. They illuminated his tired gray face, but his eyes looked alert and wary. As soon as Chris sat beside Ginny, the door slid slowly open. Standing in the doorway, illuminated by the shivering flames, was a cloaked figure that towered to the ceiling. Its face was completely hidden beneath its hood. Ginny shivered badly and curled up in a corner. Chris squeezed her hand. Chris was feeling bad too. But it was different. She was feeling something bad was going to happen. And then the thing beneath the hood, whatever it was, drew a long, slow, rattling breath, as though it was trying to suck something more than air from its surroundings. An intense cold swept over them all. The unfamiliar boy beside Chris was trembling and sweating. Chris patted his back. Harry's condition was worst of all. Suddenly, Chris saw Harry passed out on his seat, then fell on the floor. Eyes closed, twitching. The man with the flames came forward and said, "None of us is hiding Sirius Black under our cloaks. Go." But the Dementor didn't move. Chris got up from her seat and shouted, "You heard him, now leave." Chris didn't know why she did that, but slowly the Dementor turned to her and then left. After a few seconds, the light came back and the train started to move. The person with the flames looked at her, with a curious and suspicious look. Chris turned away from his gaze and focused on Harry. "Harry! Harry!" Ron called. "Harry, are you all right?" Hermione said loudly. Chris kneeled beside Harry and slapped him lightly. Harry, get up." "What?" Harry opened his eyes and put on his glasses while sweating badly. Chris, Ron, and Hermione heaved him back onto his seat. "Are you okay?" Ron asked nervously. "Yeah," said Harry, looking quickly towards the door. "What happened?" "Where's that thing?" "Who screamed?" "It was a Dementor." "Harry," Chris said while rubbing Ginny's back, who was very nervous and pale. "They feed on our happiness and can wake our worst, saddest memories." Ginny shivered again, so as the unfamiliar boy, who Chris realized was a Gryffindor boy in Harry's year. "It's okay, Ginny. Everything is fine now." All of them stared at Chris when a loud snap made them all jump. The man was breaking an enormous slab of chocolate into pieces. "Here," he said to Harry, handing him a particularly large piece. "Eat it, it'll help." Harry took the chocolate, but didn't eat it. "Eat," he repeated. "It'll help. I need to speak to the driver. Excuse me." He strolled past Harry and disappeared into the corridor. "Who's that?" Chris asked Hermione. "Oh, it was Professor Lupin." Hermione pointed at the luggage rack. Chris nodded. "Are you sure you're okay, Harry?" said Hermione, watching Harry anxiously. "I don't get it. What happened?" said Harry, wiping more sweat off his face. "Well, that thing, the Dementor, stood there and looked around." "I thought you were having a fit or something," said Ron, who still looked scared. "You went sort of rigid and fell out of your seat and started twitching. And Professor Lupin stepped over you and walked towards the Dementor and pulled out his wand," said Hermione. "And he said, 'None of us is hiding Sirius Black under our cloaks. Go.' But the Dementor didn't move. Then..." Hermione looked at Chris. Chris stepped up and ordered the Dementor to go and it left. Again, everyone was staring at her. Chris felt annoyed by the looks. What, it was affecting all of you, wasn't it? If it stayed for a little more, then Harry could have more badly affected. Those creatures can suck your soul out of you. So I did what I felt was right at that moment. Chris said angrily. Professor Lupin came back. He paused as he entered, looked around and said, with a small smile, "I haven't poisoned that chocolate, you know." "Hermione, watch Ginny, please. I'll go and check on Luna and Colin," she said sharply, and got up. "Excuse me, Miss," Professor Lupin said, standing in her way. "Christina Norton, Professor," she answered. "Miss Norton, I'd like to talk to you for a moment," he said. "First, I must tell you, Professor, that I didn't know why I ordered that Dementor and why it obeyed me. I just wanted to help my friends. That's it," Chris said sharply. "I was going to ask if you're all right. You didn't eat the chocolate and I saw you were looking for others, but yourself," Professor Lupin said with a smile. Chris was embarrassed. She never talked to a teacher like that. She respects everyone, but she didn't understand why she behaved like that. "I'm sorry, Professor. I'm fine," she said, looking down. "It's all right. Eat the chocolate. We'll be at Hogwarts in 10 minutes and go check on your friends," said Professor Lupin. Chris nodded and hurriedly left. Luna and Colin were almost fine. They felt bad for some time, but no one was scared like Ginny or Harry. Chris told them what happened at Harry's compartment. "So, Dementors have different effects on you. Luna said after listening. What? Chris asked, confused. I meant everyone feels sad near Dementors. They make people sad, but they make you angry. Luna explained. Maybe. I don't know. Chris sighed. At long last, the train stopped at Hogsmeade Station, and there was a great scramble to get out. Owls hooted, cats meowed. It was freezing on the tiny platform. Rain was driving down in icy sheets. First years this way, called a familiar voice. Chris turned and saw the gigantic outline of Hagrid at the other end of the platform, beckoning the terrified-looking new students forward for their traditional journey across the lake. Chris remembered her last year experience. Hagrid smiled and she waved at him but had no chance to speak to him, because the mass of people around them was shunting them away, along with the platform. Only first years go by boat at Hogwarts. Chris, Ginny, and Luna went by boat last year. This year they followed the senior students of the school out onto a rough mud track, where at least 100 stagecoaches awaited the remaining students. Each pulled, Chris assumed, by an invisible horse, because when they climbed inside one and shut the door, the coach set off all by itself, bumping and swaying in procession. The coach smelled faintly of mold and straw. Colin was also with them. So the carriages pull on their own. That's so wicked, he said enthusiastically. They are the straws. They're pulling the carriages, Luna said, looking out of the window. What's the straw? Ginny asked. The sectors are skeletal, winged horses, only can be seen by those who have witnessed death, Luna answered simply. Oh, who did you? Ginny stopped in mid-sentence. My mother, Luna said. They didn't speak for the rest of the ride, as the carriage trundled towards a pair of magnificent wrought iron gates, flanked with stone columns topped with winged boars. Chris saw two more towering, hooded Dementors standing guard on either side. The carriage picked up speed on the long, sloping drive up to the castle. All four of them were leaning out of the tiny window, watching the many turrets and towers draw nearer. At last, the carriage swayed to a halt, and they got out. The door into the great hall stood open at the right. They followed the crowd towards it. Where's Professor McGonagall? Chris asked as Professor Flitwick started the sorting ceremony. She took Harry, said Hermione, to her office. Ron answered, sitting opposite of them. Why? Ginny asked. No idea. Ron shrugged. The sorting started. Like last year, the sorting hat sang a song, then sorted the first years in 4 houses. Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and Slytherin. As the sorting ceremony ended, Harry, Hermione, and Professor McGonagall came back. Harry and Hermione sat down on either side of Ron, who had saved them seats. What was all that about? He muttered to Harry. Harry started to explain in a whisper, but at that moment the headmaster stood up to speak, and he broke off. Professor Dumbledore, though very old, always gave an impression of great energy. He had several feet of long silver hair and beard, half-moon spectacles, and an extremely crooked nose. He was often described as the greatest wizard of the age. Chris always respected Dumbledore, as she felt that he was a wise man. He knew what was right for the greater good. Welcome, said Dumbledore, the candlelight shimmering on his beard. Welcome to another year at Hogwarts. I have a few things to say to you all, and as one of them is very serious, I think it best to get it out of the way before you become befuddled by our excellent feast. Dumbledore cleared his throat and continued. As you will all be aware after their search of the Hogwarts Express, our school is presently playing host to some of the Dementors of Azkaban, who are here on Ministry of Magic business. He paused, maybe for the students to process the news, but Chris couldn't figure out why Sirius Black would come to Hogwarts. They are stationed at every entrance to the grounds, Dumbledore continued. And while they are with us, I must make it plain that nobody is to leave school without permission. Dementors are not to be fooled by tricks or disguises, or even invisibility cloaks, he added blandly, and Chris looked at Harry, who also understood that the line was for him. It is not in the nature of a Dementor to understand pleading or excuses. I therefore warn each and every one of you to give them no reason to harm you. I look to the prefects, and our new head boy and girl, to make sure that no student runs foul of the Dementors. Percy, who was sitting a few seats along from them, puffed out his chest again, and stared around impressively. Dumbledore paused again. He looked very seriously around the hall, and nobody moved or made a sound. On a happier note, he continued, I am pleased to welcome 2 new teachers to our ranks this year. Firstly, Professor Lupin, who has kindly consented to fill the post of Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. There was some scattered, rather unenthusiastic applause. Only those who had been in the compartment on the train with Professor Lupin clapped hard. Chris among them. She was still very embarrassed. Professor Lupin looked particularly shabby next to all the other teachers in their best robes. As to our second new appointment, Dumbledore continued, as the lukewarm applause for Professor Lupin died away. Well, I am sorry to tell you that Professor Kettleburn, our Care of Magical Creatures teacher, retired at the end of last year in order to enjoy more time with his remaining limbs. However, I am delighted to say that his place will be filled by none other than Rubeus Hagrid, who has agreed to take on this teaching job in addition to his gamekeeping duties. Chris, Harry, Ron, and Hermione stared at each other, stunned. Then they joined in with the applause, which was tumultuous at the Gryffindor table in particular. Chris leant forward to see Hagrid, who was ruby red in the face, and staring down at his enormous hands, his wide grin hidden in the tangle of his black beard. "We should have known," Ron roared, pounding the table. "Who else would have set us a biting book?" Harry, Ron, and Hermione were the last to stop clapping, and as Professor Dumbledore started speaking again, they saw that Hagrid was wiping his eyes on the tablecloth. "Well, I think that's everything of importance," said Dumbledore. "Let the feast begin." The golden plates and goblets before them filled suddenly with food and drink. Chris helped herself to everything. It was a delicious feast. The hall echoed with talk, laughter, and the clatter of knives and forks. "Are you three going to congratulate Hagrid?" Chris asked Hermione. Hermione nodded enthusiastically. "I mean, we all know how much this means to him, isn't it?" "I agree," Ron said. "I want to congratulate him, too," Chris said. "Me too," Ginny said. They knew how much being made a teacher would mean to him. Hagrid wasn't a fully qualified wizard. He had been expelled from Hogwarts in his 3rd year, for a crime he had not committed. It had been Chris who had cleared Hagrid's name last year. At long last, when the last morsels of pumpkin tart had melted from the golden platters, Dumbledore gave the word that it was time for them all to go to bed, and they got their chance. Chris, Ginny, Harry, Ron, and Hermione went towards the teacher's table. "Congratulations, Professor Hagrid," said Chris, smiling. "All down Terrier, Chris," said Hagrid, wiping his shining face on his napkin as he looked up at them. "Can't believe it, great man. Dumbledore came straight down to me hut after Professor Kettlebun said he'd had enough. It's what I always wanted." Overcome with emotion, he buried his face in his napkin, and Professor McGonagall shooed them away. Then they joined the Gryffindors streaming up the marble staircase, and very tired now, along more corridors, up more and more stairs, to the hidden entrance to Gryffindor Tower. A large portrait of a fat lady in a pink dress asked them, "Password? Coming through. Coming through." Percy called from behind the crowd. "The new password's Fortuna Major." "Oh no," said Neville Longbottom sadly. "The same boy from Harry's compartment." Through the portrait hole and across the common room, the girls and boys divided towards their separate staircases. Chris and Ginny climbed the spiral stairs and went towards their room. Next morning, Chris, Ginny, and Colin entered the Great Hall and took their second-year timetable from Professor McGonagall. "Ah!" Chris made a face in irritation. "Our first class is herbology. I can't do this." "Herbology is a good subject, Chris," Ginny said, eating her breakfast. "But I don't like it," Chris answered. "And it's double herbology," Colin said, chuckling. "Colin, don't, or I'll never help you at potions," Chris said with a cold stare. "Sorry," Colin said hurriedly, and concentrated on his breakfast. "It's okay, Chris, you will survive," Ginny said, smiling. "And look, we have our defense against the dark arts class after lunch." "Great, this day couldn't get better," Chris said sarcastically and put her head on the table. "Why, is it because you snapped at Professor Lupin yesterday?" Colin grinned. "Colin," Chris said angrily. Ginny laughed. "Forget it, Harry. Dad had to go out to Azkaban one time. Remember, Fred? And he said it was the worst place he'd ever been. He came back all weak and shaking. They sucked the happiness out of a place. Dementors. Most of the prisoners go mad in there." Chris heard George speaking to Harry, a little far on the table. "Anyway, we'll see how happy Malfoy looks after our first Quidditch match," said Fred. "Gryffindor versus Slytherin, the first game of the season. Remember?" Chris perked up hearing them. "Do you want to try for Quidditch this year?" she said suddenly, changing her expression into a grin. The spoon fell from Ginny's hand. Colin gave multiple expressions, surprised, thoughtful, and happy. "But we're just in the second year, Chris," Ginny said quietly. "Harry was in the first year when he joined the team," Chris replied. "But he is different," Ginny grimaced. "He is not any different, exotic animal, Ginny. He is also a human like us. But, Ginny, it's your childhood dream to play Quidditch. Come on, it'll be fun. I'm trying. Chris said, smiling. You are. Ginny looked surprised. Yep. For what? I mean, Gryffindor Quidditch team have very good players. We're not able to beat them. Ginny said skeptically. Ginny, let's try at least. I'll try for a chaser. You? Chris said. Come on, Ginny. It's just a trial. Colin said enthusiastically. Ginny sighed. Fine, we'll try together, she said finally. Chris and Colin cheered together. I'll talk to Wood and ask him when is the trials, Chris said, grinning as they left for their herbology class. Professor Sprout was a squat little witch who wore a patched hat over her flyaway hair. There was usually a large amount of earth on her clothes and her fingernails. Greenhouse 3 today, chaps, said Professor Sprout in her usual cheerful self. There was a murmur of interest. They had only ever worked in Greenhouse 1 before. Greenhouse 3 housed far more interesting and dangerous plants. Professor Sprout took a large key from her belt and unlocked the door. Chris caught a whiff of damp earth and fertilizer mingling with the heavy perfume of some giant, umbrella-sized flowers dangling from the ceiling. I can do this, she repeated in her mind. Professor Sprout was standing behind a trestle bench in the center of the greenhouse. About 20 pairs of different colored earmuffs were lying on the bench. We'll be repotting mandrakes today. Now who can tell me the properties of the mandrake? She said, and soon lots of hands shoot in the year. Of course, after what happened last year, almost everyone knows what's a mandrake. Professor Sprout asked a Hufflepuff girl. Mandrake, or mandragora, is used to return people who have been transfigured or cursed to their original state. The girl answered, Excellent. 10 points to Hufflepuff, said Professor Sprout. The mandrake forms an essential part of most antidotes. It is also, however, dangerous. Who can tell me why? This time Professor Sprout asked a Gryffindor boy. The cry of the mandrake is fatal to anyone who hears it, he answered. Precisely. 10 points to Gryffindor, said Professor Sprout. Now the mandrakes we have here are still very young. She pointed to a row of deep trays as she spoke, and everyone shuffled forward for a better look. 100 or so tufty little plants, purplish green in color, were growing there in rows. Everyone takes a pair of earmuffs, said Professor Sprout. There was a scramble, as everyone tried to seize a pair that wasn't pink and fluffy. Chris, Ginny, and Colin took the pink and fluffy ones by choice because they were comfortable. When I tell you to put them on, make sure your ears are completely covered, said Professor Sprout. When it is safe to remove them, I will give you the thumbs up. Right earmuffs on. They snapped the earmuffs over their ears. They shut out sound completely. Professor Sprout put the pink, fluffy pair over her own ears, rolled up the sleeves of her robes, grasped one of the tufty plants firmly, and pulled hard. Instead of roots, a small, muddy, and the extremely ugly baby popped out of the earth. The leaves were growing right out of his head. He had pale green, mottled skin, and was clearly bawling at the top of his lungs. You can do this, Chris repeated in her brain, and took a deep breath. Professor Sprout took a large plant pot from under the table and plunged the mandrake into it, burying him in dark, damp compost until only the tufted leaves were visible. Professor Sprout dusted off her hands, gave them all the thumbs up, and removed her own earmuffs. As our mandrakes are only seedlings, their cries won't kill you. However, they will knock you out for several hours, and as I'm sure none of you wants to miss your first day back, make sure your earmuffs are securely in place while you work. I will attract your attention when it is time to pack up. Forward to a tray, there is a large supply of pots here. Compost in the sacks over there, and be careful of the venomous tentacula, it's teething. She gave a sharp slap to a spiky dark red plant as she spoke, making it draw in the long feelers that had been inching sneakily over her shoulder. Chris, Ginny, and Colin were joined at their tray by a black-haired Hufflepuff boy. Hey, I'm Melvin Catterick, he said nervously. You're Chris, aren't you? Chris nodded with a smile and boy suddenly turned pink. Ginny and Colin chuckled. Hiya. I'm Colin Creevy, Colin said. Oh, yes, I've heard about you last year, he replied, and shook hands with Colin. I'm Ginny Weasley, Ginny said, shaking hands with him. Yes, of course. Nice to meet you all, Melvin said again, glancing towards Chris. Chris moved her eyes towards the work at hand. As they began filling their plant pots with dragon dung compost, Ginny whispered in Chris's ear, You got a new admirer. Chris rolled her eyes. Melvin tried to talk to Chris few times, but Chris politely ignored him. After that, they didn't have much chance to talk. Their earmuffs were back on and they needed to concentrate on the mandrakes. Professor Sprout had made it look extremely easy, but it wasn't. The mandrakes didn't like coming out of the earth, but didn't seem to want to go back into it either. They squirmed, kicked, flailed their sharp little fists, and gnashed their teeth. Chris spent whole 15 minutes trying to squash a particularly fat one into a pot. By the end of the class, Chris, like everyone else, was sweaty, aching, and covered in earth. Next, they had chams with Ravenclaws, so Chris, Ginny, and Colin have sat with Luna. Chris always liked the charms class, so it was easy for her. They worked on a few spells for some time. At last, the bell rang for lunch, and they all left together for the Great Hall. As they get near the Gryffindor table, Chris heard a clattering sound. Ron's fork fell on his plate, and he was watching Harry, his mouth open. Ginny also noticed that, and they intentionally sat near them. As they sat, they heard Ron speak loudly. "Hermione, if Harry's seen a Grim, that's bad," he said. My Uncle Bilius saw one, and he died 24 hours later." "Coincidence," said Hermione airily, pouring herself some pumpkin juice. "You don't know what you're talking about," said Ron, starting to get angry. "Grims scare the living daylights out of most wizards." "There you are then," said Hermione in a superior tone. "They see the Grim and die of fright. The Grim's not an omen, it's the cause of death. And Harry's still with us because he's not stupid enough to see one and think, right, well, I'd better pop my clogs then." "What's a Grim?" Suddenly Colin said loudly, looking at them. Harry, Ron, and Hermione looked startled as they turned towards Colin. Chris gave Colin a cold look. Colin hurriedly added, "You all were talking very loudly. Couldn't help but hear." And he put a lot of food in his mouth to prevent himself from talking. "We're talking about our first divination class," Hermione answered. "Really? How was it?" Luna asked curiously. "If you ask me, I think divination seems very woolly. A lot of guesswork, if you ask me," Hermione said. "There was nothing woolly about the Grim in that cup," said Ron hotly. "You didn't seem quite so confident when you were telling Harry it was a sheep," said Hermione coolly. "Professor Trelawney said you didn't have the right aura, you just don't like being rubbish at something for a change." Everybody froze. Ron had touched a nerve. Hermione slammed her book down on the table so hard that bits of meat and carrot flew everywhere. "If being good at divination means I have to pretend to see death omens in a lump of tea leaves, I'm not sure I'll be studying it much longer. That lesson was absolute rubbish compared to my arithmancy class." She snatched up her bag and stalked away. Ron frowned after her. "What's she talking about?" Ron said to Harry. "She hasn't been to an arithmancy class yet." "So what's a Grim?" Colin asked again. Harry sighed. "It's a death omen. Professor Trelawney, our divination teacher, had predicted my death this year." Ron kicked Harry, glancing at Ginny, who was stunned like Colin, Luna, and Chris. Ginny noticed that and snapped, "I'm not fragile anymore." Ron, "And so yeah, that's it. Hermione thinks it's nothing but stupid and Ron thinks it's true," said Harry, looking at Chris. "You know, I think they both are right," Chris said. Everyone looked at her. "How can they both be right, Chris? They're saying the opposite things." Ginny said, confused. "I don't think Professor Trelawney lied, or pretended, but I also think we can change our future. So I suggest, if Harry thinks it's true, then he should prepare to face it, win over it, rather than feeling sad for it. You fought death many times, didn't you? One more time won't hurt," Chris said with a smile. Harry smiled back. "I agree," Luna said excitedly. After lunch, Chris, Ginny, and Colin walked towards the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom. Last year, Lockhart made it the most boring subject, but this year, a new professor joined. Everyone was excited. Chris was nervous. Professor Lupin came in, smiled vaguely, and placed his tatty old briefcase on the teacher's desk. He was as shabby as ever, but looked healthier than he had on the train, as though he had had a few square meals. "Good afternoon," he said. "Would you please put all your books back in your bags? Today's will be a practical lesson. You will only need your wands." A few curious looks were exchanged as the class put away their books. They had never had a practical defense against the dark arts before. "Right then," said Professor Lupin, when everyone was ready. "If you'd follow me." Puzzled but interested, the class followed Professor Lupin outside. Soon they entered the courtyard. "So today, we'll learn a spell which will slow down any abstract or creatures or person," Lupin said, smiling. Everyone was listening attentively. Chris noticed even Jason Foley, a Slytherin boy, was watching Professor Lupin curiously. We will practice the charm without wands first. After me, please, impedimenta. Impedimenta, said the class together. Good, said Professor Lupin. Very good. Now, he brought a cage. There were 3 small and thin birds. I must say they're very fast birds. So be careful, Lupin said, and freed a bird. Watch closely. As soon as the bird came out, it started flying like the golden snitch. At least Chris felt that. Professor Lupin holds his wand, pointed at it, and said impedimenta. The bird slowed down and Professor Lupin put it in the cage. Now, one by one. No need to panic. I'll watch you all closely. He looked around and spotted Chris. Miss Norton, let's start with you. Chris came forward and took a deep breath, and readied her wand. Professor Lupin freed one bird. It started to fly, and without waiting, Chris muttered, impedimenta. The spell hit the bird, and it slowed down. Then others started to practice. Ginny also missed it 2 times, then did it. Few Slytherins were practicing when suddenly a bird escaped and started to fly away. Chris had a feeling she should help Lupin. I can catch that, Professor, she said, and Lupin nodded. She ran towards it. It was flying fast and going in a different direction, so Chris wasn't able to use the spell. Luckily, the bird wasn't flying vert high, so she just followed it. At last, Chris slowed it. When it was going into a padlock, Hagrid was taking his class there. As she crossed the fence and cast the spell, Hagrid noticed her. Everything all right there, Chris? He asked. Sorry, I was following this. She caught the bird. Everyone looked back at her. Chris suddenly had a weird feeling. She looked around and saw few creatures which had the bodies, hind legs and tails of horses, but the front legs, wings and heads of what seemed to be giant eagles, with cruel steel-colored beaks and large brilliantly orange eyes. The talons on their front legs were 1/2 foot long and deadly looking. Each of the beasts had a thick leather collar around its neck. The third-year students were patting those creatures. Hagrid smiled, seeing Chris's curious face. They're hippogriffs. Beautiful, aren't they? Chris smiled back, coming close. This is very easy, Malfoy drawled loudly. Chris heard him clearly. I knew it must have been, if Potter could do it. Chris went closer to the hippogriff, as Malfoy said to the hippogriff. I bet you're not dangerous at all, are you? Are you, you ugly great brute? In a flash, Chris realized what was going to happen. The hippogriff's front legs were up in the air to attack Malfoy. Chris was fast. She pulled Malfoy out of the way. The hippogriff turned towards Draco. Draco hid behind Chris, and she faced the hippogriff. Well, easy. Easy, Chris said, holding her arms wide in front of the hippogriff. The hippogriff tried to reach Draco, but as soon as it looked at Chris's eyes, it started to calm down. Easy, easy. She spoke with a soothing voice, and the hippogriff put his legs down. Hagrid came running. Everyone all right? Everyone all right? How dare you, you bloody chicken? Draco said angrily. The hippogriff turned towards Draco again. Draco tried to back. No! Easy, Chris said to the hippogriff. The hippogriff made a sound like it was complaining to Chris. Surprisingly, Chris understood what the hippogriff was feeling. She felt annoyed by Draco and turned towards him. Say sorry, Chris ordered. What? Draco said in disbelief. Say sorry or I'll step aside and you'll be dead, Chris snapped. Hagrid tried to interfere, but the hippogriff turned around. Septa. So sorry, Draco whispered. Loudly, Chris shouted. Sorry, Draco shouted. Here we go, he said sorry, and we'll never insult you again, Chris said, patting the hippogriff, which it clearly enjoyed. As Hagrid took away the hippogriffs, Draco Malfoy rounded on Chris. Just wait till my father hears about this. He'll don't like a stupid animal attacking me, he spat. Almost every Gryffindor glared at him, especially Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Chris gave him a smile and spoke calmly. Listen, Malfoy, you know very well that it was your fault that the hippogriff attacked you, but you can see, no harm is done. So, suddenly, her expression changed. If anything happens to Hagrid's job or the hippogriffs, then without thinking, I'll beat you until you are incapable of writing letters to your father anymore. Got it? Draco Malfoy shivered under Chris's cold stare. Crabbe and Goyle, 2 friends of Draco, stepped forward hearing this. They both were big enough to shadow Chris completely. Chris smiled again. Don't even try, boys. You don't know me. A Slytherin girl who was mostly seen with Draco, Pansy Parkinson, shouted. How dare you to treat him like that? Don't you know who is he? Trust me. I know. Chris smirked. See, Malfoy, last year when I insulted you, your team captain literally hit me with a curse, and now you insulted a hippogriff, so he became violent as well. In short, no matter who you are, you'll get angry if someone insults you. So if you want respect, then try to give respect first, because every time your father will be not around for you, and your family name will not work every time as well. So, be smart. Chris clapped on Draco's shoulder and left. She heard the Gryffindors cheering after her. When she gets back to the country, she saw the class had ended. Only Professor Lupin was standing there alone. Chris realized while saving Draco, she had lost the bird and now she had no idea where was it. She slowly approached Lupin.
Here?
Professor Lupin. Yes? Lupin turned around to face her. Actually, I lost the bird. Sorry. It's all right. You did well in class, though I expected you to catch it. Using the spell, no problem. It's just the first day, he said with a smile. I did actually. What? Lupin asked, confused. I cast the spell on it while it was flying. I even caught it then. Then, something happened at Professor Hagrid's class. What happened, Professor Lupin asked curiously. So Chris told him everything except the part where she threatened Draco. Well, you did a good thing. You should be happy, Christina. I know, Professor. But Chris looked around if anyone else was there. But there was no one. I don't know how I did it. How I controlled that hippogriff. Harry told me how he had to bow first, then had to wait for the hippogriff's response. They're very proud creatures. Then how? How just by looking at me, it obeyed me. Chris was confused. Maybe it understood that you respected it. It felt connected to you. It happens, Christina. Some creatures feel connected to us.
Then what about the Dementor on the train?
They don't obey orders from a random person. Something is wrong with me, Professor. I know. She looked down. There is nothing wrong with you, Christina. Professor Lupin said, patting her shoulder. But if you still feel wrong, then I'll see what can I find about these things. Chris looked up surprised and excited. You will, Professor? Yes. I can't watch my students in distress, can I? He smiled. Now go. No need to worry. Chris felt completely assured as she felt around Dumbledore. She smiled and left. At the Gryffindor Tower, Ginny and Colin were waiting for her in the common room. As soon as she entered, they both ran towards her. Are you okay, Chris? Ginny asked urgently. Yes. Are you all right? We heard from Dean and Neville about the Hippogriff incident. Colin said next. Dean Thomas and Neville Longbottom were both in Harry's year. Obviously, they were in Hagrid's class, but Chris didn't think that the news will spread this fast. Everything is all right, guys. I'm fine, Chris said calmly. Did you really save Malfoy? Ginny asked, surprised. Yes. Did you threaten him too? Colin asked excitedly. Yes. You shouldn't have. Who knows what will he do next? Ginny said worriedly. I don't care, Ginny. I do what I feel right. I can't work according to others, she said, and flopped down on an armchair. Ginny and Colin sat on her either sides. I wish I was there. I could have taken a lot of pictures. Colin said sadly. So, what happened in the class after I left? Chris asked. Nothing much. We practiced a little, then you didn't come back for a long time, so Professor Lupin was worried. Colin answered. So was a Slytherin boy. Ginny said. A Slytherin boy? Chris asked, surprised. Yeah, don't know why, but he asked Professor Lupin if he can go and check. Ginny answered, but Professor Lupin asked us not to worry. He'll wait, and then he dismissed the class. Colin finished. Wait, it can't be Jason, Chris said loudly. Jason? Ginny and Colin said together. Did I say that aloud? Chris asked. Yes. Now tell me who's this Jason? Ginny said giggling. Oh, nothing much to say. He is a Slytherin boy, and once I stole a recipe from his potion notebook last year. Chris answered coolly. What? Why? Not so important. Relax. Let's go for dinner. I'm starving. Chris said and got up. At Great Hall they entered and Hagrid approached them. Chris? He called and Chris stopped. Yes, Hagrid. Professor. Oh. Donna, I'll never forgo. You saved me today. I don't know what would have happened if something had happened to Malfoy. Thank you. It's all right, Hagrid. I did that for myself. Chris smiled. I'm planning to take care of magical creatures next year, and don't want to learn it from anyone else. You're a great animal lover, Hagrid. You'll be natural in this job. Don't let this kind of small things drag you down. Hagrid smiled confidently and nodded. They moved on to the Gryffindor table. How do you know the perfect thing to say every time? Ginny asked, sitting beside her. I don't know. It's just, I feel life is very short. So I want to make a difference in people's lives as much as I can. Chris answered while filling her plate with roasted chickens. That's so thoughtful of you, Chris. I believe that too. Luna said, sitting opposite to them, besides Colin. Everyone is here for a reason. Your reason is so honorable. I'll add it with my search of crumpled horn Snorkack. Yeah, I was about to ask, any luck finding them? Chris asked. No, still not. But we discovered many new things. Oh, wait, I made something for you too. Luna searched her bag and took out 2 necklaces made of butterbeer corks. I made these for you both. Chris had noticed them before. Luna usually wore a butterbeer necklace and cherished handmade earrings. She always liked to wear unique things, especially self-made things. Chris and Ginny both took the necklace. Chris put it on with a smile and Ginny said she'll wear it later. After dinner, as Chris entered the Gryffindor common room, she saw Oliver Wood, the Gryffindor Quidditch team captain there. Wood, can I talk to you for a second? Chris said, walking towards him. Yes? Wood looked at her. Well, I was asking, do you think we can try for Quidditch this year? Me and Ginny, Chris said and pulled Ginny beside her. Chris, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but our team is already pretty great. I didn't think we will take tryouts this year. By the way, for what you want to try. Ginny's face fell. Chasers, Chris said confidently. And Wood, we just want to try out. So, you can try next year, or so. You two have plenty of time. That's why we want to start this year. Wood, you always should give a chance to new students. Chris said sharply. I know, but, he sighed. You're right. Fine, I'll think about tryouts for Chasers, and if you two can beat our current team, Chasers, only then you'll be selected. Cool. Chris hugged Ginny excitedly as Wood left. Are you sure it's going to be okay? Ginny asked uncertainly. Ginny, at least we get to try. I didn't persuade Wood for you to chicken out. We'll be great, Chris said. After 1 week, Wood fixed the date for tryouts. Other than Chris and Ginny, few 4th and 5th year students came for trials. Luna and Colin sat on the stands. In the Quidditch field, the Gryffindor team was present, except Harry. The Weasley twins were very happy to see their sister trying. They came and encouraged her and Chris. Weasley twins were Gryffindor beaters. In the Quidditch match, there are 7 players on each side. 1 keeper, 1 seeker, 2 beaters, and 3 chasers. The chasers throw the quaffle to each other and try and get it through one of the hoops to score a goal. 10 points every time the quaffle goes through one of the hoops. Keeper's job is to block the quaffle before it goes through the hoop. Beaters deal with bludgers and seekers with the golden snitch. Wood was the Gryffindor team keeper. Wood stated the rules very clearly, and everyone mounts their brooms and flew up. When Chris and Ginny were about to do that, Alicia Spinnet, a current Gryffindor team chaser, approached them. I heard from Wood, you two asked him for this tryout, she said seriously. Chris and Ginny exchanged looks. Let's see what you two can do. All the best, she said and smiled. It's nice to see Quidditch spirit like this. Con. Chris and Ginny smiled back and 3 of them kicked at the ground, soaring up into the air. A Gryffindor boy threw the quaffle up, and in a split second, Angelina Johnson snatched it from the air. Others tried to take the quaffle from her but failed. As Chris came close to her, she threw it towards Alicia and Alicia tried to pass it through the hoop, but Wood stopped it and threw it back. Katie Bell caught it and threw it back towards Angelina. Angelina scored. Chris sighed and looked at Ginny. Ginny looked at her and Chris heard Ginny muttering, "That's it." The quaffle was back in Alicia's hands. Suddenly Ginny went towards Angelina in full speed, and before Angelina can catch the quaffle from Alicia, she came in between and caught it. Before Wood can react, Ginny scored. Chris almost whistled. The quaffle was back and this time Chris caught it. In a few seconds, Ginny and Chris showed some great coordination, and after some time the tryouts ended. Everyone landed on ground, and Wood came down with a smile. He talked with Alicia, Angelina and Katie for a minute at little far from them, then came back. So I've decided, Wood said with a smile. Ginny and Chris looked at him curiously. I think you all know the scores, Wood said, and everyone nodded. The scores were like this. Angelina 5, Ginny 5, Chris 4, Alicia 3, Katie 2, another fifth-year boy did 1 goal. So I talked with our current 3 chasers, and we have a conclusion. Alicia thinks you 2 can be better chaser than her. Wood said, shocking everyone. Yeah, I think so. You 2 are just in 2nd year, and you did great. So I guess little more practice and you 2 can be professionals. And our final aim is the same, winning the Quidditch Cup. Alicia said. I agree. Honestly, I never took Quidditch very seriously. As my future carrier, I played because everyone said I'm a good player. So now when we've options to choose more talented chasers, then why not? Katie Bell said, smiling. I like the way you 2 played, Angelina Johnson said. So the decision is made. Our new chasers will be Angelina Johnson, Christina Norton, and Ginny Weasley. Wood said, and the twins jumped up and down and hugged Ginny. Everyone congratulates them. Alicia almost threatened them to win. Katie was happy for them. Angelina said she will personally train them both for their first match. Wood asked them not to tell anyone else about this. They agreed. That day, at dinner, Weasley twins celebrated this with Chris, Ginny, Colin, Luna, Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Are you serious? Or Ginny beat Angelina's score? Ron asked, his mouth wide open in surprise. Yes, you should see her, George said. You should see them. Ginny and Chris, together they were unstoppable. Fred said, congratulations you both. Harry said, smiling. Yes, congratulations. Hermione repeated, thanks. Chris said, smiling, but Ginny was looking nervous and barely listening anything. Chris noticed her. Are you okay, Ginny? You were happy a few minutes ago. What happened? Oh, nothing. I was thinking about our first practice with Angelina, she said, and put on a fake smile. Chris didn't say anything. Everyone concentrated on their dinner. Chris knew what was bothering her. She wrote to Mrs. Weasley about her selection, but only then she realized that she was going to need a new broom. All the money Mr. Weasley got last summer, they had spent almost all of it. Now if they buy a broom for her, it'll be a not very fast broom, like her brother's, and worse if they didn't have enough money to buy the cheapest one. 3 days later, at breakfast, as the owls flooded into the Great Hall, as usual, everyone's attention was caught at once by 2 long thin packages, each carried by 6 large screech owls. Chris knew at once what were those when the owls soared down and dropped one right in front of her and another one in front of Ginny, knocking his bacon to the floor. Everyone tried to get a glimpse, guessing what can be it. Chris opened her parcel and heard a sharp intake of breaths from people around her. It was a broomstick, none other than a firebolt. Ginny looked at Chris's broom and opened her own parcel with shaky hands. Ginny clapped on her mouth as she saw that was in another firebolt. She looked at Chris in disbelief. Colin took lots of pictures. Almost everyone in Great Hall was staring at them. Harry, Ron, Fred, George, Hermione came running towards them. It's gorgeous, Harry said, grinning. Brilliant, Ron squealed. Who sends it, Ginny? Fred asked. I don't know how. Ginny looked at Chris's smiling face. If to answer that question, Leanne came with 2 letters. Chris took the letters and saw one is addressed to her and others was for Ginny. She gave a letter to Ginny and opened hers. Dear, my little eagle, congratulations on making into the team. Honestly, I was sure you'll make it. As promised, your gift? Fly high, darling. All the best. Love, your dad. Chris closed the letter with a big smile. After getting into the team, Chris wrote a letter to her father about her and Ginny's success. Chris peeked into Ginny's letter. Dear Ginny, congratulations on making into the Quidditch team, dear. A small gift from me, consider it as an early Christmas gift. No need to worry, I've already sent a letter to your parents and convinced them you have your parents' permission to take it. Good luck on your first match. Love, Mr. Norton. Ginny was in tears. She hugged Chris tightly. You told your father to send this, didn't you? She said. Honestly, no, Ginny, I didn't. I just told him we both got selected in the team. That's it, Chris said, patting her back. And trust me, if it wasn't for you, then Dad would have brought one for himself and decorated it in our house. Ginny chuckled and let Chris go. Thank you. Write to my father. He'll be happy, Chris said, smiling back. I will, I promise. Ginny smiled back and wiped her tears. George patted her head. Next few days went by like a breeze. Firebolt really was the fastest broom. Chris felt it was like flying on a rocket. She and Ginny practiced hard with Angelina. Other than that, Chris was having a hard time maintaining the Quidditch practice with her studies. Colin and Luna helped her, and Ginny for that. Even Hermione helped a lot. In no time at all, Defense Against the Dark Arts became most people's favorite class. Only Draco Malfoy and his gang of Slytherins had anything bad to say about Professor Lupin. "Look at the state of his robes," Malfoy would say in a loud whisper as Professor Lupin passed. "He dresses like our old house elf." But no one else cared that Professor Lupin's robes were patched and frayed. His next few lessons were just as interesting as the first. The potions were getting scarier. Snape was in a particularly vindictive mood these days. He was finding excuses for hating every Gryffindor, and no one was in any doubt why. Hermione had told Chris the reason. It was a story of the boggart, a shapeshifter, which can take the shape of whatever it thinks will frighten us the most, taking Snape's shape and Neville dressing it in his grandmother's clothes. The story had traveled through the school like wildfire. Snape didn't seem to find it funny. His eyes flashed menacingly at the very mention of Professor Lupin's name, and he was bullying Neville worse than ever, even outside the class. Chris was really feeling bad for Neville. Ginny was also feeling bad for him, so she started to talk to him frequently. Chris also heard Hagrid's care of magical creatures lessons were going well. Hagrid was still confident and working on his classes greatly. Everyone was enjoying it. Most importantly, Draco Malfoy didn't do anything after the first day. He wasn't attentive in any class, but also wasn't in the mood of creating troubles for Hagrid. Some thought he was scared of Chris. Some thought he was planning something big against Chris. Nobody knew what's going on, and Chris didn't bother about it that much. At the second week of October, as the Quidditch season was approaching soon, Oliver Wood, captain of the Gryffindor team, called a meeting one Thursday evening to discuss tactics for the new season. There were 7 people on a Quidditch team. 3 chasers, whose job it was to score goals by putting the quaffle, a red football-sized ball, through one of the 50-foot-high hoops at each end of the pitch. 2 beaters, who were equipped with heavy bats to repel the bludgers. 2 heavy black balls which zoomed around trying to attack the players. A keeper who defended the goalposts, and the seeker, who had the hardest job of all, that of catching the golden snitch, a tiny winged walnut-sized ball, whose capture ended the game and earned the Seekers team an extra 150 points. Oliver Wood was a burly 17-year-old, now in his 7th and final year at Hogwarts. There was a quiet sort of desperation in his voice as he addressed his 6 fellow team members in the chilly changing rooms on the edge of the darkening Quidditch pitch. "This is our last chance, my last chance, to win the Quidditch Cup," he told them, striding up and down in front of them. "I'll be leaving at the end of this year. I'll never get another shot at it. Gryffindor haven't won for 7 years now. Okay, so we've had the worst luck in the world, injuries, then the tournament getting called off last year." Wood swallowed, as though the memory still brought a lump to his throat. "But we also know we've got the best, ruddy, team in this school," he said, punching a fist into his other hand, the old manic glint back in his eye. "We've got 3 superb chasers. Though Chris and Ginny are new, they have proven themselves a great deal." Chris, Ginny, and Angelina smiled. Wood smiled back and continued. "We've got 2 unbeatable beaters." "Stop it, Oliver, you're embarrassing us," said Fred and George Weasley together, pretending to blush. "And we've got a seeker who has never failed to win us a match," Wood rumbled, glaring at Harry with a kind of furious pride. "And me," he added, as an afterthought. "We think you're very good too, Oliver," said George. "Cracking keeper," said Fred. "The point is," Wood went on, resuming his pacing, "the Quidditch Cup should have had our name on it these last 2 years. Ever since Harry joined the team, I've thought the thing was in the bag, but we haven't got it, and this year's the last chance we'll get to finally see our name on the thing." Wood spoke so dejectedly that even Fred and George looked sympathetic. "Oliver, this year's our year," said Fred. "We'll do it, Oliver," said Angelina. "Definitely," said Harry. "We will win," said Chris, Ginny, and George together. Full of determination, the team started training sessions, 3 evenings a week. The weather was getting colder and wetter, the nights darker, but no amount of mud, wind, or rain could tarnish Chris's wonderful vision of winning the huge silver Quidditch Cup. Chris returned to the Gryffindor common room with others, one evening after Quidditch training, cold and stiff but pleased with the way practice had gone, only to find the room buzzing excitedly. "What's going on?" Chris asked Hermione, who was sitting by the fireside with Ron. Harry also went towards them. "First Hogsmeade weekend," said Hermione, pointing at a notice that had appeared on the battered old notice board. "End of October. Halloween." "Excellent," said Fred, who had followed Harry through the portrait hole. "I need to visit Sanko's. I'm nearly out of Stenka pellets." Harry threw himself into a chair beside Ron, looking sad. "Harry, I'm sure you'll be able to go next time," Hermione said. "They're bound to catch Black soon. He's been sighted once already." "Black is not fool enough to try anything in Hogsmeade," said Ron. "Ask McGonagall if you can go this time, Harry. The next one might not be for ages." "Run," said Hermione. "Harry's supposed to stay in school. He can't be the only third year left behind," said Ron. "Ask McGonagall. Go on, Harry." "What are you three talking about?" Chris asked, raising an eyebrow. "Is this the topmost secret of Harry's life, which he wanted to talk with only you two?" Aaron looked around, and then looked at Ginny. Ginny rolled her eyes. "Really very subtle, Ron." "Fine, if you don't want to tell," Chris said, crossing her arms. "We're not dying to hear that, but I don't think Professor McGonagall will allow you to go without the signed permission letter, which you don't have." Chris got up and Ginny followed, glaring at Ron. Chris and Ginny had barely stepped on the stairs when they heard Ron's voice. "Oi!" Ron roared, seizing his bag, as Crookshanks sank 4 sets of claws deeply into it, and began tearing ferociously. "Get off, you stupid animal!" Ron tried to pull the bag away from Crookshanks, but Crookshanks clung on, spitting and slashing. "Ron, don't hurt him!" squealed Hermione. The whole common room was watching. Ron whirled the bag around, Crookshanks still clinging to it, and Scabbers came flying out of the top. "Catch that cat!" Ron yelled, as Crookshanks freed himself from the remnants of the bag, sprang over the table, and chased after the terrified Scabbers. George Weasley made a lunge for Crookshanks, but missed. Scabbers streaked through 20 pairs of legs and shot beneath an old chest of drawers. Crookshanks skidded to a halt, crouched low on his bandy legs, and started making furious swipes beneath the chest of drawers with his front paw. Chris hurriedly went there. "Crookshanks, no, it's a bad thing. Don't do it. Crookshanks, stop. Hermione will be upset if you do this." Crookshanks stopped and looked at Chris. Hermione and Ron came. Hermione grabbed Crookshanks around the middle and heaved him away. Ron threw himself onto his stomach and with great difficulty pulled Scabbers out by the tail. "Look at him," he said furiously to Hermione, dangling Scabbers in front of her. "He's skin and bone. You keep that cat away from him." "Crookshanks doesn't understand. It's wrong," said Hermione, her voice shaking. "All cats chase rats, Ron." "There's something funny about that animal," said Ron, who was trying to persuade a frantically wiggling Scabbers back into his pocket. "It heard me say that Scabbers was in my bag." "Oh, what rubbish," said Hermione impatiently. "Crookshanks could smell him, Ron. How else do you think?" "Hermione, I think Ron is right. He can understand humans' language," Chris said, and Hermione looked at her in disbelief. The people around them, who were giggling, looked at her as well. "What do you mean by that, Chris? What are you talking about?" Hermione asked angrily. I mean what I said, Hermione." He really heard Ron that Scabbers was in his bag. Then he stopped when I told him that you'll be upset if he chases Scabbers. Chris answered. "See, even Chris understood something is wrong with that beast," Ron said, fuming. "You two don't know what you're talking about," Hermione said stubbornly.
"You believe it or not, Hermione, that cat's got it in for Scabbers,"
said Ron, and marched through the common room and out of sight up the stairs to the boys' dormitories. Hermione also marched towards her room angrily. Harry looked at Chris. "Are you sure about what you said, Chris? I mean, how can be? We live in a magical world, Harry, and Hermione brought her cat from a magical market. Isn't that enough proof for you? Anything is possible here," Chris said with a matter-of-fact tone. Next day was no better. At lunch and dinner, Chris realized Ron and Hermione weren't talking to each other. Harry was particularly looking sad. Chris couldn't help but ask, "What's going on?" There was a pause, then a quarrel broke out. "Ron thinks that Professor Trelawney's prophecies are right, just because Lavender's rabbit died," Hermione hissed. "So it's just a rabbit, nothing else for you, isn't it, Hermione? Only that cat matters to you," Ron snapped. "I didn't say it means nothing, Ron. I just said she can't dread a baby rabbit's death without any reason. Professor Trelawney is not right." Hermione slammed her hand on the table. "We can't trust her and be stupid. Just because you're right, that doesn't make everyone else wrong." "Hermione," Chris said calmly, "relax." But Hermione wasn't in the mood of listening. She turned to Chris. Of all people, I thought you're smart enough not to believe in stupid prophecies and omens, Chris. But fine, I get it. She stormed out of the hall. Chris watched her leave. I really didn't mean to upset her, Chris said, surprised. Luna put a hand on Chris's shoulder. I always found her as a booked and stubborn girl. She just believes she is right. Don't worry, Chris. She'll come around when she'll understand her mistake, which I don't know when. Chris looked at Luna. She knew. Luna always speaks her mind, no matter what people think about her. But she never said anything bad about Ron, Harry, or Hermione. Chris understood she didn't, because she considered them as Chris's friends. Chris understood long ago that Luna was really different from Hermione. For example, Hermione complained about every careless thing Ron and Harry did. But Luna, she never complained about anything. She just loves the way everyone was. Hermione wanted to go everything according to her calculation, where Luna accepts the unknown dearly. Chris looked at Harry and Ron. Harry was looking more depressed and Ron was shoving a piece of pie into his mouth angrily. Hermione is a great friend, but I'm glad my best friend is Luna, she said in her mind and started eating. On Halloween morning, Chris woke up excitedly. For the first time, she was going to enjoy Halloween with her friends, without stress or anything. Last year, she had a fight with Ginny at this day, and also she had to go to the death day party of Nick and had to miss the Halloween feast. Not to mention the first attack of that basilisk on a cat. Chris got ready and went to the Great Hall with Colin and Ginny. Then Luna joined them. They talked, laughed, and ate many delicious things. Then they decided to go back to the Gryffindor Tower and do something. Luna was excited to see the Gryffindor Tower for the first time. As it was just a password, they decided to tell that to Luna. Luna wanted to show them the Ravenclaw common room as well, but it needed to solve a riddle to pass it. Chris wasn't in the mood of solving riddles, so they thought Gryffindor Tower was the better option. As they started to leave the hall, Chris saw Jason walking towards the other direction. Guys, you all go. I'll join you in a bit, she said, and ran after Jason. After following him in a few corridors, Jason stopped and turned around. Chris didn't feel like hiding, so she stood there like she was just passing and just noticed him. Why are you following me? He asked seriously. Who? Me? No, I was just passing, Chris smiled. Really? Then just pass on, he said, and waited for her to leave. Oh, well, I wanted to talk to you, Chris said, rolling her eyes. I don't want to. Jason started to turn. Please, Jason. Wait. What? How did you know I was going to save Ginny at the chamber? Chris asked. Because you're an idiot. Hey, what? I said the truth. Other than that, why will a person who doesn't know anything about dark magic and dangerous creatures will go to save a girl like that? Jason raised his eyebrows. Excuse me, first, that girl is my friend. Second, maybe I don't know everything, but I'm not entirely hopeless, okay? Chris said defensively. Great, then do more stupid things for your friends. No one is stopping you. What's your problem? I'm trying to make a conversation here, Chris said, getting annoyed. And I don't want to, Jason said. Fine. Go. All I came here to say is thank you. Thank you for the dagger. It was a great help. I will give it back. No need. Keep it. You're going to need it if you continue doing this kind of stupid things for your friends, he said, and strode away. Chris angrily went towards the Gryffindor Tower. As soon as she entered, she almost collided with Harry. Sorry, didn't see you coming, Chris said. No, it's okay, Harry said, distracted. Ginny, Luna, and Colin were sitting on an armchair and talking about something when Chris walked in. Colin saw Chris and called, Hey Chris, come here, Luna is telling us a great story. Few other Colin's roommates were also listening to Luna's story with great interest. Chris was about to go towards them when Harry called, Chris. Chris turned around and saw him standing outside the portrait hole. The fat lady was very annoyed by him and was muttering furiously. Yes, Harry. Will you mind joining me for a walk? Harry said sadly. Or Red? It's okay if you're busy, Harry said, and walked away. The fat lady screamed in rage. Chris looked towards her friends and found Ginny looking at her. Go, Ginny said, smiling. Chris smiled back and followed him. Harry, wait, Chris said. Seeing Chris, Harry's face, which was looking very depressed, looked a little bit relieved. So where do you want to go? Chris asked. She knew Ron and Hermione had gone to Hogsmeade. That's why Harry was alone. I don't know, he said, walking. Want to go towards the lake? Chris said, walking with him. The lake was Chris's favorite spot in Hogwarts. She always felt calm and relaxed near it. Yeah, let's go, Harry answered. They were walking towards the lake and suddenly turned a corner and came face to face with Filch, the caretaker in Hogwarts. What are you doing? Filch snarled suspiciously. Nothing, said Harry truthfully. Nothing, spat Filch, his jowls quivering unpleasantly. A likely story. Sneaking around on your own. Why aren't you in Hogsmeade buying stink pellets and belch powder and whizzing worms like the rest of your nasty little friends? Harry shrugged. We're just walking around, Mr. Filch. Chris answered simply. Well, get back to your common room, where you belong, snapped Filch, and he stood glaring at them. Chris opened her mouth to argue, but Harry stopped her. Let's go. They turned around and walked back. What's the point of coming out if we're going back to the Gryffindor Tower? Chris asked with a dramatic sigh. We're not going back, Harry said. Then where? Let's see. They climbed stairs after stairs, then they were walking along another corridor, when a voice from inside one of the rooms said, Harry? They doubled back to see who had spoken, and met Professor Lupin, looking around his office door. What are you doing? Said Lupin, in a very different voice from Filch. Where are Ron and Hermione? Hogsmeade, said Harry, in a would-be casual voice. Ah, he noticed Chris. Didn't see you've company. Thinking of show you the Grindylow. I've just taken delivery for our next lesson. It's okay. Go on. A what? Said Harry. It's all right, Professor. We really didn't know where we were going. Chris said casually. But will it be all right if I stay? I mean, I'll leave if you need Harry alone. No. Come in, both of you, said Lupin, smiling. They followed Lupin into his office. In the corner stood a very large tank of water. A sickly green creature with sharp little horns had its face pressed against the glass, pulling faces and flexing its long, spindly fingers. Water demon, said Lupin, surveying the Grindylow thoughtfully. We shouldn't have much difficulty with him. Not after the Capus. The trick is to break his grip. You notice the abnormally long fingers? Strong, but very brittle. The Grindylow bared its green teeth, and then buried itself in a tangle of weed in a corner. What's Capus? Chris asked, getting interested. Capus are water dwellers that look like scaly monkeys, with webbed hands itching to strangle unwitting waders in their ponds, Lupin explained. Creepy, Chris said, imagining it. Lupin chuckled. Cup of tea, he said, looking around for his kettle. I was just thinking of making one. No thanks, Professor, Chris answered. So how are your studies going on? In other subjects? Lupin said and tapped the kettle with his wand and a blast of steam issued suddenly from the spout. And it's going fine. Between the frequent Quidditch practices, it's getting a little difficult, but I'm working, Harry said. And what about you, Christina? You're very good at my class, I've noticed, Lupin said as he poured a cup of tea for himself. Well, I'm also in Quidditch team now, so I'm also balancing both as much as I can, she said. Oh, so you both are Quidditch players? Very nice. Lupin smiled with a nostalgic look on his face. I remember, when I was in Hogwarts, my best friend was also a great Quidditch player. I went to support him almost in every match. My father was also a Quidditch player in his days, Harry said, smiling. Lupin slightly frowned and was about to say something, when he was interrupted by a knock on the door. Come in, called Lupin. The door opened, and Snape came in. He was carrying a goblet, which was smoking faintly, and stopped at the sight of Harry and Chris, his black eyes narrowing. Ah, Severus, said Lupin, smiling. Thank you very much. Could you leave it here on the desk for me? Snape set the smoking goblet down, his eyes wandering between Chris, Harry, and Lupin. I was just showing them my Grindylow, said Lupin pleasantly, pointing at the tank. Fascinating, said Snape, without looking at it. You should drink that directly, Lupin. Yes, I will, said Lupin. I made an entire cauldron full, Snape continued. If you need more, I should probably take some again tomorrow. Thanks very much, Severus. Not at all, said Snape, but there was a look in his eye. He backed out of the room, unsmiling and watchful. Chris's gaze followed him while Harry looked curiously at the goblet. Lupin smiled. Professor Snape has very kindly concocted a potion for me, he said. I have never been much of a potion brewer, and this one is particularly complex. He picked up the goblet and sniffed it. Pity sugar makes it useless, he added, taking a sip and shuddering. Wyatt, Harry began. Lupin looked at him and answered the unfinished question. I've been feeling a bit off color, he said. This potion is the only thing that helps. I am very lucky to be working alongside Professor Snape. There aren't many wizards who are up to making it. Professor Snape doesn't like you very much, does he, Professor? Chris asked, looking at the goblet. Well, I'll not put it like that. It's just we've our differences. You can say that. We were in school together. He laughed a little. I was Gryffindor. He was Slytherin. You can imagine the rest. Like Malfoy and Harry, Chris said, smiling.
Kind of.
He said, and took another sip. Professor Snape's very interested in the dark arts, Harry blurted out. Chris looked at him surprised. Really? Said Lupin, looking only mildly interested as he drained the goblet and pulled a face. Disgusting, he said. Well, Harry, Christina, I'd better get back to work. I'll see you two at the feast later. Chris and Harry nodded and left his office. Do you think Snape is trying to poison Professor Lupin? Harry said as soon as he and Chris were out of Lupin's office. What? Why'd he do that? Said Chris, shocked. I don't like the way he looked at us. Then you saw the goblet. It was so... Harry, how much do you know about potions? Chris asked, and Harry didn't answer. Maybe it was just what Professor Lupin said. Your imaginations are really crazy. They stopped in front of the moving hallway. It was the most confusing hallway. It moved all the time so no one knew where it will lead you. We're lost, Harry said. No, we're not. Let's go and see where it takes us. Chris said, pulling Harry. They walked through the corridor and ended up in a different hallway, which Chris soon realized was the way to the lake. See, when we want something dearly, it comes to us on its own. Chris said, smiling, and went towards the lake. They sat on the grass beside the lake. So, your dad was a Quidditch player too? Chris said, yes. I got to know it in my first year. Harry replied. Harry, what's wrong? You're not looking like yourself. Ag, I know it's stupid, but I really wanted to see Hogsmeade. Hey, it's okay, you'll see it next year. Don't get upset over this. Chris paused, then said, Is it about Sirius Black? Harry looked at Chris, a little surprised. Look, I heard you three a few days ago, and I know something is going on with Sirius Black, and you. I don't want to invade in your life, but if you feel like telling me, you can, whenever you want, Chris explained. Harry nodded, then they sat in comfortable silence. At dusk, Chris was talking with Colin, Ginny, and Luna, who was still in their common room. When the seniors came back from Hogsmeade, Fred and George brought some sweets for Ginny. Ginny shared them with Chris, Luna, and Colin. Then they decided to go to the Great Hall for the Halloween feast. The Great Hall was decorated with hundreds and hundreds of candle-filled pumpkins, a cloud of fluttering live bats, and many flaming orange streamers, which were swimming lazily across the stormy ceiling like brilliant water snakes. The food was delicious. Everyone was tasting everything they found. Chris noticed Harry was sitting with Ron and Hermione in a little far on the table. The feast finished with an entertainment provided by the Hogwarts ghosts. They popped out of the walls and tables to do a spot of formation gliding. Nearly headless Nick, the Gryffindor ghost, had great success with a reenactment of his own botched beheading. Chris had a great time. At last, they bid bye to Luna, who followed the other Ravenclaws, and Chris, Ginny, and Colin came back to Gryffindor Tower. But when they reached the corridor, which ended with the portrait of the fat lady, they found it jammed with students. They heard Percy saying, in a sharp voice, "Somebody get Professor Dumbledore." Quick, people's heads turned. Those at the back were standing on tiptoe. What's going on? Ginny asked Ron, who was standing in front of her, along with Harry and Hermione. Next moment, Professor Dumbledore was there, sweeping towards the portrait. The Gryffindors squeezed together to let him through, and Chris, Ginny, and Colin moved closer to see what the trouble was. Oh God, Ginny exclaimed. The fat lady had vanished from her portrait, which had been slashed so viciously that strips of canvas littered the floor. Great chunks of it had been torn away completely. Dumbledore took one quick look at the ruined painting and turned, his eyes somber, to see Professors McGonagall, Lupin, and Snape hurrying towards him. We need to find her, said Dumbledore. Professor McGonagall, please go to Mr. Filch at once and tell him to search every painting in the castle for the fat lady. You'll be lucky, said a crackling voice. It was Peeves the poltergeist, bobbing over the crowd and looking delighted, as he always did at the sight of wreckage or worry. What do you mean, Peeves? Said Dumbledore calmly, and Peeves's grin faded a little. He didn't dare taunt Dumbledore. Instead, he adopted an oily voice that was no better than his cackle. Ashamed, your headship, sir. Doesn't want to be seen. She's a horrible mess. Saw her running through the landscape up on the 4th floor, sir. Dodging between the trees. Crying something dreadful, he said happily. Poor thing, he added, unconvincingly. Did she say who did it? said Dumbledore quietly. Oh yes, Professor Head, said Peeves, with the air of one cradling a large bombshell in his arms. He got very angry when she wouldn't let him in. You see, Peeves flipped over and grinned at Dumbledore from between his own legs. Nasty temper he's got. That's Sirius Black. There was a sharp intake of breaths around, different kind of moaning sounds. Almost everyone was terrified.
Sirius Black was here.
He tried to enter the Gryffindor Tower. Is he really wants to do something to Harry? No. Harry was at the Great Hall, with everyone else. Black obviously saw the decorations all around. He knew it's Halloween then, why he attacked now when nobody will be in the Gryffindor Tower. Ginny broke the trail of Chris's thoughts, as Dumbledore asked them to go to the Great Hall. Dumbledore sent all the Gryffindors back to the Great Hall, where they were joined 10 minutes later by the students from Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin, who all looked extremely confused. The teachers and I need to conduct a thorough search of the castle, Dumbledore told them as Professors McGonagall and Flitwick closed all doors into the hall. I'm afraid that for your own safety, you will have to spend the night here. I want the prefects to stand guard over the entrances to the hall, and I am leaving the head boy and girl in charge. Any disturbance should be reported to me immediately, he added to Percy, who was looking immensely proud and important. Send word with one of the ghosts. Professor Dumbledore paused, about to leave the hall, and said, Oh yes, you'll be needing. One casual wave of his wand and the long tables flew to the edges of the hall and stood themselves against the walls. Another wave and the floor was covered with hundreds of squashy purple sleeping bags. Miss Norton, Professor Dumbledore called before leaving. Chris looked up at him. A moment, please. Dumbledore went out and Chris followed. Yes, Professor. Chris asked curiously. Did anything is happening with you? Something unusual? Dumbledore asked seriously. Chris thought about the Dementors, then the Hippogriffs and Crookshanks. I already told this to Professor Lupin. No need to give more things to Dumbledore in this mess. No, Professor, she answered. Good. Now I have a very important work for you. If you found anything unusual with Harry, or just something different or wrong in the castle, you'll inform me, even it's just a feeling. Understood? Professor Dumbledore said calmly. Yes, Professor. And do not tell anyone about this talk. Chris nodded and entered the Great Hall. Sleep well, said Professor Dumbledore, closing the door behind her. The hall was buzzing excitedly. The Gryffindors were telling the rest of the school what had just happened. Chris saw Colin, Luna, and Ginny in a corner. She joined them. What happened? Why Professor Dumbledore called you? Colin asked. Nothing special, Chris replied casually. Everyone into their sleeping bags, shouted Percy. Come on now. No more talking. Lights out in 10 minutes. They climbed fully dressed in their sleeping bags. So Sirius Black wanted to enter the Gryffindor Tower. Luna whispered from her sleeping bag. I hope there are no Nargles. Here. Yes. I wonder what Sirius Black wanted to do here. You've any idea, Chris? Ginny whispered back. I'm thinking about the same thing, Chris replied.
But how did he get in here?
Said Colin, surprised. The four of them were sleeping a little far from the rest. All around them, people were asking each other the same question. How did he get in? Maybe he knows how to apparate, said a Ravenclaw a few feet away. Just appear out of thin air, you know. Disguised himself, probably, said a Hufflepuff fifth year. He could have flown in, suggested Dean Thomas. Honestly, am I the only person who's ever bothered to read Hogwarts, a history? Chris heard Hermione saying. Probably, said Ron. Why? Because the castle's protected by more than walls, you know, said Hermione. There are all sorts of enchantments on it. To stop people entering by stealth, you can't just apparate in here. And I'd like to see the disguise that could fool those Dementors. They're guarding every single entrance to the grounds. They'd have seen him fly in too, and Filch knows all the secret passages. They'll have them covered. He fooled the Dementors once. I don't think it's difficult to do it again, said Chris a little loudly, so that Hermione can hear her. Hermione turned towards her. Probably. Nowadays, Hermione was talking normally with Chris. She said that she was angry with Ron, and snapped at Chris. After that, they were good. The lights are going out now. Percy shouted, I want everyone in their sleeping bags and no more talking. The candles all went out at once. The only light now came from the silvery ghosts who were drifting about talking seriously to the prefects, and the enchanted ceiling, which like the sky outside was scattered with stars. What with that and the whispering that still filled the hall, Chris felt as though she was sleeping out of doors in a light wind, Once every hour, a teacher would reappear in the hall to check that everything was quiet. Around 3 in the morning, when many students had finally fallen asleep, Chris still wasn't able to sleep at all. She was staring at the enchanted ceiling, feeling she was watching the sky. Why Professor Dumbledore asked me if something is wrong. There are teachers, head boys, girls, and prefects. Then why he asked me to keep an eye on Harry and the castle. Though it's not possible for me to watch the entire castle, if he asked me to, then I have to do something about this. Chris was thinking about Sirius Black when Dumbledore came in. Chris watched him looking around for Percy, who had been prowling between the sleeping bags, telling people off for talking. Any sign of him, Professor? Asked Percy in a whisper. No, all well here. Everything under control, sir. Good. There's no point moving them all now. I've found a temporary guardian for the Gryffindor portrait hole. You'll be able to move them back in tomorrow. And the fat lady, sir? Hiding in a map of Argyllshire on the 2nd floor. Apparently she refused to let Black in without the password. So he attacked. She's still very distressed, but once she's calmed down, I'll have Mr. Filch restore her. Chris saw the door of the hall creak open again, and Snape came in. Headmaster, said Snape. The whole of the 3rd floor has been searched. He's not there, and Filch has done the dungeons. Nothing there either. What about the astronomy tower? Professor Trelawney's room. The owlery, all searched? Very well, Severus. I didn't really expect Black to linger. Have you any theory as to how he got in, Professor? Asked Snape. Many, Severus. Each of them as unlikely as the next. Chris saw Percy's face, rapt with attention, and Snape's profile, which looked angry. You remember the conversation we had, Headmaster, just before, the start of term, said Snape, who was barely opening his lips, as though trying to block Percy out of the conversation. I do, Severus, said Dumbledore, and there was something like warning in his voice. It seems almost impossible that Black could have entered the school without inside help. I did express my concerns when you appointed. I do not believe a single person inside this castle would have helped Black enter it, said Dumbledore, and his tone made it so clear that the subject was closed that Snape didn't reply. I must go down to the Dementors, said Dumbledore. I said I would inform them when our search was complete. Didn't they want to help, sir? Said Percy. Oh yes, said Dumbledore coldly. But I am afraid no Dementor will cross the threshold of this castle while I am headmaster. Percy looked slightly abashed. Dumbledore left the hall, walking quickly and quietly. Snape stood for a moment, watching the headmaster with an expression of deep resentment on his face. Then he too left. The start of the term. Appointed. There are only 2 persons who were appointed this year. Professor Lupin and Hagrid. Professor Snape has no problems with Hagrid, I guess. But he has with Professor Lupin, so he is suspecting that Professor Lupin is helping Sirius Black. But why? Where is the connection? The school talked of nothing but Sirius Black for the next few days. The theories about how he had entered the castle became wilder and wilder. The fat lady's ripped canvas had been taken off the wall and replaced with the portrait of Sir Cadogan and his fat gray pony. Nobody was very happy about this. Sir Cadogan spent half his time challenging people to duels, and the rest thinking up ridiculously complicated passwords, which he changed at least twice a day. Neville Longbottom, who was talking to Ginny a lot nowadays, always forgot the password, so he tried to walk in groups so anyone can answer the password for him. One day Chris and Ginny even found him outside the common room, almost asleep on the floor. They woke him up and took him inside with them. He's barking mad, said Seamus Finnegan angrily to Percy. Can't we get anyone else? None of the other pictures wanted the job, said Percy, frightened of what happened to the fat lady. Sir Cadogan was the only one brave enough to volunteer. One evening, as Chris watched the raindrops hitting the window glass in common room while wondering about Sirius Black, Ginny and Colin stopped talking beside her. Ginny suddenly shook Chris hard. What? Chris said, looking at them. Tell me, what are we talking about? Ginny said, crossing her arms. About our last defense against the dark arts class? Chris guessed. No, Chris. Colin sighed. Sorry I didn't hear. You're doing this for last few days now, Chris. You are always distracted. What's going on in that brain of yours? Ginny asked, getting impatient. Mind telling us? Yeah, Ginny is right. Nowadays, your eyes looked more dreamy than Luna's, Colin said. It's just... Chris tried to lie. The truth, Chris, Ginny said over her. Fine. I'm trying to solve this mystery about Sirius Black. Chris sighed. And I'm going nowhere. How he fooled the Dementors. How he entered the castle. Why does he want to get into our common room? What's his connection with Harry and why Professor Snape thinks that Professor Lupin helped Sirius Black? So many questions, but I don't have any answers. Nobody does, Chris. Everyone is thinking the same thing. Colin said, putting a hand on Chris's shoulder. Wait, how did you know Professor Snape thinks that Professor Lupin helped Sirius Black? Ginny asked, raising her eyebrows. Oh, that's what I think. Chris told them about the late-night talk between Dumbledore and Snape. Okay, so you know more than everyone else here, Colin said, looking impressed. No, I'm sure, Harry. Ron and Hermione know much more than this. But what? Chris mumbled. Chris, I want to help, Ginny said seriously. Are you sure? I mean, we're dealing with a murderer here. The Dementors are also involved. It can be dangerous, Ginny, Chris said uncertainly. I know, and that's why you can't do this alone, Ginny said confidently. Last year you did everything alone, Chris. Let me help at this time. Yes. I don't know how much I can help, but I'll try my best, Colin said, looking serious as well. Okay, Chris thought for a moment. Ginny, I saw Percy is keeping an eye on Harry always. So if you can get information from him about Harry, then that'll be a great help. Just make sure he doesn't understand why are you asking. Ginny nodded and Chris turned towards Colin. Listen, Colin, if you found anything unusual in the castle, anything that you never saw before in Hogwarts, you're going to tell me immediately. Am I clear? Colin nodded. I can take pictures as well, he said. No, don't. If anyone heard the clicking noises, you will be in danger. So just use your eyes, okay? Chris asked. Okay, Colin said. The weather worsened steadily as the first Quidditch match drew nearer. Undaunted, the Gryffindor team were training harder than ever under the eye of Madam Hooch. It's because of Harry. They're trying to keep an extra eye on him. Always. George told Chris when she asked about Madam Hooch's presence. At their final training session, before Saturday's match, Oliver Wood gave his team some unwelcome news. We're not playing Slytherin, he told them, looking very angry. Flint's just been to see me. We're playing Hufflepuff instead. Why? Chorused the rest of the team. Flint's excuse is that their keeper is injured. He fell from the stairs, said Wood, grinding his teeth furiously. But it's obvious why they're doing it. Don't want to play in this weather. Think it'll damage their chances. There had been strong winds and heavy rain all day, and as Wood spoke, they heard a distant rumble of thunder. There's nothing wrong with him. We saw him falling, said George furiously. He's faking it. I know that, but we can't prove it, said Wood bitterly. And we've been practicing all those moves assuming we're playing Slytherin, and instead it's Hufflepuff, and their style's quite different. They've got a new captain and seeker, Cedric Diggory. Angelina suddenly giggled. What? Said Wood, frowning at this light-hearted behavior. Chris and Ginny looked at her. He's that tall, good-looking one we saw that day, said Angelina, looking at Chris and Ginny. Oh yes, I saw him, Ginny said, giggling next. Why didn't I see him? Chris said, trying to remember. I don't know why you're worried, Oliver. Hufflepuff are a pushover. Last time we played them, Harry caught the snitch in about 5 minutes. Remember? Fred said impatiently. We were playing in completely different conditions. Wood shouted, his eyes bulging slightly. Diggory's put a very strong side together. He's an excellent seeker. I was afraid you'd take it like this. We mustn't relax. We must keep our focus. Slytherin are trying to wrong-foot us. We must win. Oliver, calm down, said Fred, looking slightly alarmed. We're taking Hufflepuff very seriously. Seriously? Chris pulled Angelina and Ginny aside after that. What is it, Chris? Angelina asked. Angelina, I was thinking we should know about the Hufflepuff chasers and keepers. That way we can prepare ourselves. Chris said, thinking. Look, if that Diggory is a really good seeker as much as Oliver thinks, then Harry will have problems beating him. So I was thinking if we can goal more than the golden snitch points, then we can still win, even if Harry fails to catch the snitch. That's a really great idea, Chris, but Angelina said, but at the same time very difficult. Yes, we've to do more than 15 goals and have to stop every single goal of them, Ginny said seriously, but we can try to do that. Fine, if you two are up to it, we'll try our best. I'll tell Wood about this. He'll be less grumpy. Angelina smiled and left. Cool idea, Chris. Ginny smiled. Thanks for supporting me. Chris grinned. Any time. The day before the match, the winds reached howling point, and the rain fell harder than ever. It was so dark inside the corridors and classrooms that extra torches and lanterns were lit. The Slytherin team were looking very smug indeed. Chris, Ginny, Luna, and Colin entered the Great Hall for lunch after their Transfiguration class. Fred and George were sitting with Ron, Harry, and Hermione, so they also went to sit near them. Chris noticed Hermione was looking very upset, and Ron and Harry were looking angry for some reasons. "You okay, Hermione?" Chris asked, sitting beside her. Hermione looked up at her, but didn't say anything. "It's because of that Snape," Ron said, fuming. "What happened?" Ginny asked, sitting beside him. "Snape took our defense against the dark arts class today," Harry answered. "What happened to Professor Lupin?" Chris asked. "He said Professor Lupin is not well to teach," Hermione said quietly. "So he took over his class," and Ron was too angry to speak. "He said bad about Professor Lupin's teaching methods, called Hermione a know-it-all, and took God knows how much house points from Gryffindor." Harry completed, "and gave me detention to scrub out the bedpans in the hospital wing. Without magic." He slammed his fist on the table. "That's too much," Luna said. "Is he doing this intentionally? It's like he has something personal with Professor Lupin, or else it's the Raxperts, who are making his brain go fuzzy." Everyone looked at Luna and then turned to Chris for the explanation. But Chris shrugged and said, "I think the first one, Luna. I think it's personal." "I think so too," Harry agreed.